So it supports collaborative place-based action. Thank you. If we can go to the next slide, please. So wonderful that we've got you here today. We have over 320 delegates registered, so people will be joining over the next couple of minutes. Really appreciate your time and your efforts in joining us. But we do have a fantastic agenda. We've got Arif and Robin talking about Black Bull's leadership on healthy weight. We've got Catherine Brown from the University of Hertfordshire talking about building evidence to strengthen the use of systems approaches in obesity prevention. We've got Councillor Lisa Denson talking about influence to impact, the role of elected members in this space. And then we have Matthew Philpott talking about driving place-based partnerships through prevention. Debbie Watson from Warrington talking about Warrington's journey to a healthier future. Kerry Ann Tunner talking about empowering schools to champion healthy weight and active lives. Professor Ewan Moore from the North East talking about their regional commitment. We've got Mark Pettigrew talking about commercial influences and with a panel session to follow it. And then we've got the summary of the conference at the end. There is a lot to get through, so I am going to have to keep us all relatively to time, I'm afraid. But first of all, next slide, please. I just wanted to do a little bit to remind us about the Health Equalities Group. So HEG is a public health charity working to improve the well-being of communities across the UK. We were established as a charity in 2005. We're an independent voice for preventative public health in the Northwest and now beyond. We work with local authorities, charities, the NHS, central governments, and many other stakeholders to help improve the conditions that hold back many of our communities. And many of our programs, as you will know, are addressing diet-related ill health, which falls under our Food Active brand. Food Active was launched by the Northwest Directors of Public Health in 2013 due to concerns about rising levels of obesity. I remember the launch well. We are currently commissioned by 21 out of 24 local authorities across the Northwest. So we have really good coverage across the Northwest, but we now work with many other regions of England to implement our healthy weight declaration and also with a wide range of stakeholders. And our core aim is to advocate for local, regional, and national action to promote healthier weight and to tackle health inequalities. And a little bit about our aims and objectives. So Food Active is there to influence policy, both locally and nationally. It provides training resources and campaigns. It does research and promotes those partnerships where we work together to address this issue. And obviously, we have events and communications events like today. Very active and I would say good value for money as a result of the work that we all do. But to today. So today's session is intended to celebrate some of the successes through reflecting on 10 years of the declaration and also through sharing best practice whilst considering the evidence base for systems working and recognizing that really important role of systems leadership, a key feature of the declaration. We also plan to consider the commercial determinants of health as part of today's proceedings, a specific theme within the declaration, and we look forward to hearing from our panelists later this morning in regards to some of the actions we can consider doing locally and regionally. As many of you will know, Food Active's Healthy Weight Declaration was launched in late 2015. It was originally delivered and developed in collaboration with a wide range of stakeholders from the Northwest, including Directors of Public Health, but the wider public health community. Robin will come on to talk about this in more detail shortly. However, over the last decade, what originated as a local policy tool to drive structural change has now been adopted by over 37 local authorities nationally to support healthy weight plans and strategies. And during this time, Food Active have continued to offer their expertise and support through healthy weight workshops and summits, healthy weight declaration learning events, the generation of briefings, case studies, and much more. So we hope today's session gives you a flavour of some of the excellent work happening up and down the country in supporting that whole systems approach. There's so much going on, and obviously we can't cover it all in the declaration in the workshop today, but we're always keen to get your feedback, learn what's working for you, learn what also needs to be improved or changed. Just a little bit on housekeeping, I'm afraid, before we start properly. Just want to say thank you to the organisers of today's conference, Chloe Hyam-Smith, who's the project manager at Food Active, Nicola Calder, program lead at Food Active, Matthew Philpott, the exec director at Health Equalities Group, and Robin Ireland, the director of research at Food Active. Events like this wouldn't happen without their planning and support. We have, as I say, got a very busy session, but we have got time for questions. So please use the Q&A to post any questions for our speakers, and we'll try and get through as many of them as possible. Recording and the speaker presentations will be uploaded to the Food Active website shortly. And we also have Claire, our live scribe from Nifty Fox Creatives, capturing the essence of the conference today. And we'll come back to Claire at the end of today. But first of all, I'd like to introduce Dr. Arif Rajpura, Director of Public Health for Blackpool Council, and Dr. Robin Ireland, who's the Director of Research at the Health Equalities Group, who will be discussing Blackpool's leadership on healthy weight. And as you will know, Blackpool Council were the first local authority to adopt the Healthy Weight Declaration back in 2016. So over to Arif and Robin. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Matt. Real pleasure to be here. It's nice opportunity, isn't it, that we get every now and again to reflect on things, and I think it's really important. Can people see my screen?
Yeah, we can see that,
Yeah.
Robin.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Let me just check I'm sticking to time as well, because I'm mindful of the timing we have to do across today, as Matt said. So thank you once again. And like Matt, I can remember the launch 10 years ago again. So I'm the warm-up act for Arif, who absolutely brilliant, that Blackpool adopted way back in January 2015. But let me sow the scene and let you know how all that happened, because I think it really is quite important to reflect and see where we've come from. And it is quite amazing when you saw that slide with all the councils and how it spread for the Northwest. So you'll all have seen this slide before, I'm sure, at some stage or other. But it is really important just to remember, basically, we haven't been getting it right, and we haven't been getting it right for a long time. We're not really getting it right now. We're doing our best at local, at regional level, and sometimes what we're having to do is make up what we all hope might be happening at national government level. But it is interesting to see. So you'll see actually Food Active actually started before the Healthy Weight Declaration, which came in 2015, but Food Active as a program within the Health Equalities Group actually started in 2013. And it's interesting, we predate the Obesity Health Alliance. And I guess it's worth always appreciating that when you're looking at ill health, when you're looking at health inequalities, the drive for change often comes from those areas that experience it most. And of course, unfortunately, the Northwest doesn't always have good figures around its health and around prevalence of overweight and obesity. So we start to feel the problems perhaps earlier and start to need to address it earlier. So that's what we were doing back in 2013, and it's worth reading that paper that supports that slide. And I think we'll be, unfortunately, using this slide. It obviously will need updating at some point, and reflecting why things haven't worked. But we are still doing these things. We still frame the solution overweight and obesity as about individual education. How many times do you hear that in the media? How many times do you find yourself having to discuss with elected members or members of the community? Well, people just need to learn what to do. Well, usually people actually know what they want to do. It's just incredibly difficult to do it. We very much still have this feeling that government intervention is not good, and yet we need the support of the state, we need the support of local government, we need the support of our community organisation to help us to build healthier environments. There's nothing wrong with nanny status if nanny is looking after its communities, its most vulnerable individuals within it. And we've really got to stop blaming and stigmatising individuals, making people feel absolutely dreadful about themselves at the same time while we're completely ignoring the obesogenic environment that they happen to live in. So way back when, November 2013, collaborative program launched by the Northwest Directors of Public Health, and in fact, it was originally given the very snappy title of Northwest Obesity Task Force, which obviously we decided probably wasn't the best name. And his aim, as it says there, was let's get away from trying to find these individual catch-all solutions which don't work. We have to look at population level interventions. We have to look at the social, environmental, economic, and legislative factors that affect people's ability to change their behavior. We have to develop policies which help promote a healthy weight environment. And Matt will remember this. Northwest Director of Public Health in 2014 launched a public health manifesto. And within the public health manifesto were obviously 10 items, but 3 here all specifically do really relate to what then became a healthy weight declarations. And there was a call, it's worth reflecting again, Food Active has always endeavoured to advocate for national policy, because we always recognise that, as I was saying earlier, if we get national policy right, well, it makes it an awful lot easier for us on the ground to improve healthy environments. So we made the call then for the Director of Public Health for a call for sugar sweetened beverage duty, which of course did eventually come in through in one form. A ban on the marketing of high fat, sugar and salt food. We're getting some of that finally in January 2026. And policies to encourage active travel, use of public transport, which is sort of ongoing and still happening. Worth reflecting, and I'm actually immensely proud of this because I've been part of the push, I guess, to be talking about commercial determinants of health more seriously for quite a long time, way back in 2014. We were with the support again of the Director of Public Health. We put on a commercial determinants of health masterclass with Professor Ilona Kickbush coming over, and she wrote a very important paper around commercial determinants of health in 2016. Well, this predated this, and I remember walking down the street with her in Manchester, having collected her from the airport, and discussing really about our environment, what it looked like. It helped open my eyes how the environment, how our behaviour is shaped by the environment. Also in August 2014, we felt the feeling, and I say we, which is a bit of a royal we, because all the people that we were talking to, including people like Matt and Directors of Public Health across the Northwest, academics, there was a feeling, well, what can we do? What can local government do? What can local authorities do? They're clearly system leaders. How can we take leadership around healthy weight environments? And what we felt we had been good at over the preceding years was the work done around tobacco control and the collective approach to that. And there was, as Matt very well knows, the work done in Smoke Free Liverpool and work in the Northwest. We helped to unquestionably help the national legislation that came through in 2006 and 2007, enacted in 2007 in England around smoke-free workplaces. And we knew there was a local government declaration on tobacco control, and we want to see was that usable in a food environment. And Hazel Cheeseman, who's still with us, was kind enough to come along and present to a workshop back in August 2014 to discuss exactly that. And we consulted, as it says here, with academics, local authority, officers, public health community. What did we need to do? We agreed the initial focus should be on local authorities. Importantly, we needed to involve both senior officers and elected members. We felt the accountability, the ownership, the governments was critical from the beginning. We started off with 12 commitments, we're now 16. We developed evidence base. We pulled together, should I say, an evidence base for each one of them. We now have 16 because the commitments were reviewed during 2020 during COVID. So we now have 16. And we then piloted the commitments in consultation with Blackpool, Knowsley and St Helens. We had local workshops. It's good to see not only Blackpool, but all those 3 local authorities subsequently adopted the local authority healthy weight declaration. So what the council signed up to, we'll be talking about this across the morning, but strategic system leadership, commercial determinants of health, health promoting infrastructures, organisational change, cultural shift, monitoring and evaluation has to be a part of it. And right from the beginning, we've talked about the importance of system leadership. And I've been quite involved both in England and in Scotland over evaluations of whole systems approaches to healthy weight, which the declaration is a part of. And I feel most strongly that system leadership is the bit that people often get wrong. Those signing the declaration should be at a minimum involved the Director of Public Health elected members, usually the council with a lead responsibility for health and well-being, or perhaps the leader of the council. We need that clear reporting procedure and accountability. We need to involve all parts of the council, ideally its partners, and we'll hear about how the declaration has evolved over the last 10 years across the course of the morning. We need to monitor and progress on against the commitments. I pinched this slide from a colleague in Glasgow, but people have seen versions of it all the time. What concerns me sometimes when we talk about healthier environments is we focus on the bottom end there of the stream. We need weight loss interventions. We need parenting interventions. And despite what I said earlier, yes, people always need support around health education, knowledge. But if you're really going to change things, you need to focus upstream. You need to look at why people are becoming and having to live with overweight and obesity. And it's no good looking at those solutions unless the people looking at it have access to power, money and resources. Otherwise, you're not going to get very far. And again, this is something we need to discuss over the morning. So as I come to a conclusion, our learning from developing healthy weight declarations, it's all about process. We have to take time. I put here, not everyone understands the population-based prevention approach. Unfortunately, probably still the majority of people don't, although I like to think that people on this call will understand how important it is. We have to engage senior leaders early, not later on. We've got to be there at the start. We've got to have key partners engaged. Taking a whole systems approach is very worthwhile, but it takes time, and get that monitoring and evaluation built into the process from the beginning. And I think that is the end of my slides. So I will, if I can, I'm trying to stop sharing. Here you go. Thank you very much for your time on that. And Arif, I'm really looking forward to hearing what happened next in Blackpool, which I know I was part of as well.
Thank you, Robin. That's a fantastic introduction. And thank you to the two Matts and the entire Food Active team for putting this conference together and for the invitation to present. Can I have the next slide, please, Chloe? Thanks. So it was important for us to be the first off the blocks because our figures, when it comes to childhood obesity and physical inactivity and fruit and veg consumption, always at the wrong end of the stats table. And it was important for us to galvanize around this important topic and be the first to sort of sign the declaration. I have to say, we got the declaration through the council very quickly, but that was the easy bit, and the hard work then started once we'd signed the declaration. I put there in the green box our holiday activities and food program. The reason I put that there because I don't think you can discuss overweight, obesity without discussing poverty. Poverty breeds poor diets, and so it was important for us to think about that as part of our work on this really important topic. And we in Blackpool, and I'll talk about it in a moment, we provide free school breakfast to all our primary school kids. So we control quite a lot of the nutrition of our primary school kids. We're controlling 2/3 of the daily nutrition for our kids. The thing that always concerns me is what happens in the holidays. So it's important that we've got a good holiday activities program which includes healthy food, and as part of that, the government funds 6 weeks of this program, but we've supplemented that from the public health budget to cover more of the school holidays. So I just wanted to mention that. Next slide, please. And not surprisingly, our adult figures aren't great either. So this is a really important topic for a place like Blackpool. Can I have the next slide, please? So in terms of the declaration, we signed it. We were the first to sign it in 2016, and it was serendipity because there was a lot of media coverage around the proposed sugar levy at the time. So it was sort of at the forefront of a lot of thinking, and it just helped us get it through. You know, I think we first floated it in August 2015 and then got it signed in January 2016. Once we'd done that, that's when the hard work started, as I said earlier. But then we had an intervening period of the pandemic, and the work then slowed around this whole agenda. And what we did in 2022, with the help of Robin, is we relaunched it in Blackpool. And the reason for doing that was our NCMP data was going the wrong way, and we wanted to really start to put a bit of effort into this post-pandemic, as well as also our strategy was out of date and we needed to create a new obesity strategy. Next slide, please. So we've got 6 key areas in our strategy linked to the local authority declaration. And I've mentioned food provision in schools, and this is an area, I mean, we have significant levels of poverty and food poverty. And one of the things that we've done over the last decade plus, in 2013, we introduced a free school breakfast scheme to ensure that children have the energy and nutrients needed to learn, improve attendance and concentration levels, as well as promoting healthy eating habits. So we've provided that from the public health budget for since 2013. Recently, we reviewed the whole scheme. The reason we did that was over the course of the last few years, we had seen the sort of content of, you know, things like brioche getting introduced into the breakfast scheme, and also potentially some double breakfasting of kids that had already had a breakfast. So we needed to re-look at it and make sure that it was addressing the needs, because what we wanted to do was address the needs of those kids turning up to school hungry that hadn't had a breakfast. So as part of the updated scheme, we're providing fluoridated milk and fruit to all children that arrive at school. But for those that haven't had a breakfast, we're providing a fund to each school to provide a healthy breakfast, whether that be oats, low sugar, low salt cereals, eggs, yogurt. And we leave it to the school to decide who to give those breakfasts to. So we've redesigned the scheme to actually meet the needs and to take out some of the unhealthy products, as well as to stop some of the double breakfasting. Next slide, please. In terms of talking about the obesogenic environment, one of the things that we were keen to do, you might expect, we have lots of fast food outlets in Blackpool. And I think we sort of have to accept to a degree that more meals are eaten outside of the home, and we need to provide healthier choices for our community out when they're out and about and eating from restaurants. So we introduced the Healthier Choices Award, which is a public health initiative targeting food outlets, and we work with those food outlets that have a hygiene rating of 3 and above. The award recognizes establishments that make simple but impactful choices, changes to their menu, such as reducing salt and oil levels, as well as increasing the amount of vegetable proportions and providing healthier options on the menu. At the time of speaking, I think there's 192 premises across Blackpool that have got this award, and they get a recognition for it, and then they also get some free marketing from the council around the award. So that sort of helps with trying to sort of address some of the population measures, I guess, we can take at a local level within Blackpool. Next slide, please. I think food poverty is a really important issue, and it's something that really concerns me. As I've said a couple of times, poverty is linked to poor diets, and one of the things our nutritionist did, working with the cost of living advisor that we've got in our social housing company, Blackpool Coastal Housing, was to work on a community cook and eat project. And we had a donation of 250 slow cookers provided by Cadent Gas. And as part of that, our nutritionist did some sessions with people that received the cookers, the slow cookers, to actually help them prepare nutritious meals, cost-effective nutritious meals. So that's another initiative that we've done to try and enable our communities to prepare food that's nutritious but also cost-effective. Next slide, please. In terms of other things targeting young people, thank you again to the Food Active team who developed the Gulp campaign, Give Up Loving Pop. We've run this campaign consistently over the years for our primary schools and secondary schools. So we run it with Year 4 pupils and Year 7 pupils. And with Year 4 pupils, we also have this program called Fit to Go that the Football Community Trust runs, which sort of which is targeted at all Year 4 pupils. So you get sort of reach across the whole year group, which is a 8-week program on physical activity and diet and nutrition run by our football community, Blackpool Football Community Trust. And as part of that, we also run this Gulp campaign, which has been incredibly well received and successful in Blackpool. Next slide, please. As part of the sort of, and Robin talked about, the obesogenic environment, and that's absolutely where we need to focus our attention. One of the things, when we're talking about sort of individual support, we've provided that individual support as well as at a local level with the work we've done with Slimming World. So we've commissioned GP referrals to Slimming World for those that are obese and adult population that are obese, and that is proving to be quite successful. They get a 12-week program through Slimming World, and we have seen some modest levels of success with that program. So it's something that we've decided to continue when looking at that sort of individual level support. Next slide, please. And finally, one of the things that we've been working on recently has been this sort of advertising and sponsorship element. And as you can imagine, we get approached across the council, particularly a place like Blackpool, for all sorts of things to be advertised on our spaces and our events. And increasingly, I'm being asked my opinion on what we should and shouldn't be associated with. And so as part of that, we're working on a new advertising and sponsorship policy, which includes all the stuff that around food, but also other things around gambling, alcohol, fossil fuels. And so we're just going through that process around developing that policy. I think lots of local authorities across the country are looking at advertising policies. So it's one of those things that we will be developing, which will have food as part of that. I mean, interestingly enough, our Football Community Trust has been approached often by chocolate companies and things like that, and they've always come to me and asked me whether they should take that money, and we've always said no. And so it's difficult, isn't it, when money gets thrown at organizations and you have to refuse them. But this is what we need to do at a local level through the leadership of the local government declaration. I'll stop there, thank you, and hand back to you, Matt.
Arif, Robin, thank you so much. Really interesting, and also a little bit of a history bit, especially the top 10 for number 10 documents, which I remember well. I'm always struck by 14 strategies and 689 policies, and the fact that so much effort has gone into those things. People are clearly trying to do the right stuff, but it just doesn't work, and maybe that's something we need to come back to. Just a reminder to Delegates, if you've got any questions, please post them in the Q&A, and we've got an opportunity to come back to them in a minute. But next, it gives me great pleasure to introduce our next presentation, Building Evidence to Strengthen the Use of Systems Approaches in Obesity Prevention. And that's by Catherine Brown, who's Professor of Behaviour Change in Health from the University of Hertfordshire. Hi, Catherine.
Thank you very much. Can everybody see my slides? Am I showing the right screen? Excellent. Yeah. Well, first of all, thanks very much for inviting me to contribute this morning. It's a real pleasure to be here. I am going to talk about some of the work we've done on evaluating whole systems approaches implemented in local authorities, but in the most detail today, I'm going to touch on some evidence review that we've done. Just want to note my collaborators in this work. It's very much a team endeavour, so their names are all noted there on that first slide. So just to tell you a little bit about my background and my involvement in whole systems approaches to tackling obesity. I actually got a background as a health psychologist, developing and evaluating behaviour change interventions, and those have been across a whole raft of kind of public health challenges and issues, but including weight management, obesity, and so on. The work that I've done that's on whole systems approaches to obesity really started perhaps about 4 years or so ago, and has been part of our work as a public health intervention responsive studies team. So I've been chief investigator of one of those since 2020, and we've delivered a couple of evaluations of the rollout of whole systems approaches. So one in the east of Scotland, 2 local authority areas in the east of Scotland, which finished a couple of years ago, and we're just coming to the end of a process evaluation of the same thing across 3 early adopter local authorities in Northern Ireland. And I should note that Public Health Wales have been successful in being matched with another first to have their work in this space evaluated. And there has indeed been some other evaluations by firsts in this space. This work, I think particularly the review of reviews that I'm going to talk about today, has led to me coming and talking to lots of sort of local authorities and Office for Health Improvement and Disparity colleagues about that and the things that we've learned. And also through that work, we've formed a systems consortium of researchers and academics who contribute to the evidence base here. So between us, we've submitted an evidence to the recent Health Select Committee call on how to tackle obesity, really arguing the case for the need for kind of bolder action around supporting whole systems approaches to tackling this issue. We are planning a national event, which I'll sort of plug to you, and I'm sure will be shared via your networks, on whole systems next year. Sorry, I've just pinged some slides forward unintentionally. Yeah, it'd be great if we got some input from colleagues who are here today on that. So obviously the purpose of the conference today is to reflect 10 years on the Local Authority Declaration on Healthy Weight. I won't say very much about that. I know other colleagues have already done so, but I think it is a sign of so many local authorities really taking this seriously. Many of those that have adopted this are driving their whole systems approaches work forwards. And it's genuinely contributing, I think, to their success in being able to achieve that. You've probably seen numerous slides in your time that look a little bit like this one, but I think it is worth just having a quick reflection on, I think, what this sort of graph shows us. So there was a slide shown by Robin earlier about the sort of national policy on obesity and tackling overweight, which was kind of first recognised by national government in the UK in 1991. And we can see from this graph that obesity itself has doubled pretty much since it was recognised as a public health challenge that needed addressing. But I think what this sort of graph shows us is the real scale of this is a population issue, and that we are not going to get ourselves out of this challenge by focusing our efforts on individuals and groups and individual level interventions and services. We need things that focus on what will change things for people much more upstream, as Robin and others have already commented today. And it can be a bit depressing, I appreciate, to look at graphs of this nature and think, well, what, nothing much has changed. How are we going to kind of turn the dial on this issue? But as alluded to by others already this morning, we have had success, tackling population level issues of this nature before. Rates of smoking have been on a downward trend since the 1970s. It took a long time from the evidence coming through in the 50s to turning the tide, but it happened. But of course, behaviourally, obesity is strongly linked to diet and other factors. But one of the key challenges in relative to smoking is that people do have to eat. No one needs to smoke. So there's a kind of fundamental difference in the messaging that we need here. There are, of course, as well, a lot of complex interplaying drivers of obesity. A range of related behaviours, and even with smoking, cultural norms took real time to shift. And I think we really need to push that message out, but we need to do it without stigmatising people. Legislation tightened up over time on tobacco, and we really need to get equally as tough on those that control the food environment and other aspects of the relevant system. Because of obesity's complexity, whole systems approaches have absolutely been recommended in order to try to shift as many important levers affecting that complex interplay of factors simultaneously as possible. Just going in with one-off policies and services and interventions is not going to get us where we need to be. So I will say a bit now about what our review of reviews of whole systems approaches to diet and healthy weight showed. I would recommend having a look at the paper if you've not come across it before. We aim to determine how whole systems approaches to diet, healthy weight or obesity have been implemented nationally and internationally, and to pose these 4 specific questions. So what models or theories have been used to implement whole systems approaches? We're very conscious of the fact that Public Health England guidance published in 2019 with Leeds Beckett colleagues has been quite instrumental in a UK context, but we wanted to understand how that's been borne out more widely. How have whole systems approaches been evaluated? Are they effective? And what features are associated with their effectiveness? And what has been the involvement of the public and or service users in the development? We looked at over nearly 8,000 articles, a number of different types of reviews. They are all there, but I won't dwell on those. We found 3 different types of review, which I've sort of labelled here. The one that we were actually most interested, though, in the end, in terms of answering those very specific research questions, was ones where the reviews had included studies that have evaluated the actual implementation of a whole systems approach to obesity, and there were only 3 of those. Within those 3 reviews, 27 studies were included, and they helped us dig into those 4 research questions I identified earlier. So the first, what models of theories have been used to develop and implement whole systems approaches? Notably, nothing at the time we ran these searches had drawn on the Public Health England Leeds Beckett guidance. Obviously, that may change going forwards. The best studies demonstrating the best effectiveness tended to be based on socio-ecological theory, with one study drawing on social cognitive theory. And many of them also talked about using a capacity building approach or community-based participatory research. There's a lot of process evaluation out there. So in terms of how these things have been evaluated, there's a lot of process evaluation and much less in terms of a supply of robust outcome evaluation. You can see some of the designs there that have been included in those outcome evaluations. But no, this is just 37 studies in total, and we have obviously this much larger evidence base of high quality randomized control trials of things like weight management interventions. So, when policymakers are looking at evidence, they have an absolute swathe of that demonstrating some effectiveness, much less in this space. Similar, though, to individually focused weight management services and interventions, long-term follow-up is lacking. Are they effective? Well, amongst the most robust studies, there is some indication of positive outcomes. So I've listed there some of the outcomes that have been identified as having positive benefits. We also identified that most of the more effective whole systems approaches had included the NICE or Garside et al. 10 features of a whole systems approach, suggesting that those features are helpful considerations for success. I won't dwell on what those all are in detail, but you'll find systems leadership, which has been talked about by Robin this morning, is certainly in there, getting good, robust communication strategies across the system. But I would recommend that article to you. And then notably, the public has been involved in developing whole systems approaches, and we certainly found evidence when we looked into those specific articles that involving the public, engaging with relevant communities, does seem to have an association with those stronger outcomes for delivery of these. If you want to have a look at in more detail, we've got loads on the website in terms of briefings as well as the articles. Just a little conscious of time, so I'm going to just pass on the what is a whole systems approach stuff. There is some debate about what counts as a whole systems approach, and we could perhaps get into that within Q&A. But I just wanted to touch briefly on challenges faced by local governments. So a lot of our work has identified some of these coming through for local authorities and their partners in making this happen. So we're operating obviously post-COVID, that caused a lot of delays. Lots talk about challenges with momentum. So keeping things going when you're several years in, all of those partners that you're working with. Doing the co-production, knowing when to do it, knowing how to do it is a challenge. Having expertise around systems dynamics and really making the most of understanding the system, modelling the system, and so on. We've got academic colleagues working on easier solutions for that for local authorities, so do watch the research space for more on that. You know, what's the difference between good partnership working and whole systems work? That gets debated quite a lot. I think it's about continuing to build in new levels of stuff that you're doing. But critically as well, I think there's a challenge for local authorities in having all the right levers to pull when you're thinking about the different levers in the system that you want to change. And not all of that is in the gift of the local authority, not by any stretch. We've had a lot of obesity policy, as has already been mentioned this morning, from national government. Very little of it actually gets implemented. And what we really need, I think, in terms of a way forward, is two key things. Increasingly supporting the public to demand change on this issue. We need them to feel outraged and demand that more is done in this space. And we absolutely need national government to put bolder policies absolutely in place that really support local and regional efforts to make changes happen on this agenda. I will stop talking there and attempt to end the share and stop sharing.
Catherine, thank you so much, and full marks for getting ahead of time as well. That was superb. I'm really interested. So a reminder about questions in the chat, please, which will come up on. But I'm really interested in the failure stuff. So just from your presentation, where whole systems approaches fail, would you say there's one key thing? Is that the lack of community involvement?
I think community involvement is one of the spaces that local authorities have struggled on. Not everybody, there's some great examples of good work in this space, but I think delivering the whole systems approach is really complex and really challenging. We've got lots of kind of advice from the process evaluations to kind of, you know, give local authorities support about how to try to overcome some of those early barriers in particular. But often there's a lack of confidence in engaging communities because of stigma around this as an issue. And then often those communities are not engaged with early enough. I think we're, you know, language often comes up as an issue. What language do you use to talk about this issue with communities and to get their, you know, engagement, their input, really kind of ignite a drive in them to be involved, but without stigmatizing and finding a comfortable way to talk about that. there's a whole raft of kind of challenges in those particularly early phases about getting things going, but I think that is one of them. And I think the systems buy-in and the leadership all the way up the chain of command is absolutely critical as well. Robin talked about that earlier. And I think one of our learning points is that you can never go too high up the chain of command in terms of getting that buy-in, that support and that input, right at the top. Department of Health and Social Care and lots of other departments as well.
Yeah, Catherine, great. Thank you so much. And we'll come back to you in the Q&A. But now I want to introduce our next speaker. So this is Councillor Lisa Denson from Cheshire West and Chester Council, who's going to be talking about from influence to impact, the role of elected members in local systems change. Lisa, over to you.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. So, hello, my name's Lisa Denson. So, my role at Cheshire West and Chester is ward member for the Westminster ward in Ellesmere Port, and I'm the cabinet member for A Fairer Future. So, thank you for inviting me today to speak. Do I just shout next when we want to move to the next slide, please? Thank you. So I know there will be delegates at this conference from across the UK, so I thought it would be useful to explain a little bit about Cheshire West and Chester to set the scene. So geographically, Cheshire West and Chester is located in the northwest of England and within Cheshire and Merseyside ICB footprint. The borough of Cheshire West and Chester covers approximately 350 square miles and is the fourth largest unitary authority in the northwest. The area is characterised by attractive countryside, varied landscapes and diverse settlements. This includes the historic city of Chester, industrial towns, market towns and rural hamlets. Over 371,000 people live in the borough and over a quarter live in rural areas. The population is expected to increase over the next 10 years, particularly in our older age groups. So compared to our neighbouring local authority areas, residents generally experience better health. The proportion of local children who are living with obesity is similar to the national average at reception age, so 9.7% compared to 9.6%, but less than the England average at year 6, so 20.2% compared to 22.1%. 61.6% of local adults are reportedly overweight in comparison to 64.5% nationally. If we could move to the next slide, please. Thank you. So whilst Cheshire West is an affluent borough, the overall picture masks stark gaps between areas of prosperity and deprivation. So some 26,731 local people live in neighbourhoods ranked in the most deprived 10% of England. The number of local children in low-income families has increased from 13.3% in 2020-21 to 17.8%. This is equivalent to 11,164 children in 23-24. 11.4% of Cheshire West and Chester households live in fuel poverty. More recent information shows that visits to food bank have fallen from a high of 26,012 in 22-23 to 18,115 in 24-25. The percentage of local pupils known to be eligible for free school meals continues to increase steadily, reaching 20.2% in 2025. Overweight and obesity at year 6 ranges from 21.1% in one of our least deprived wards to 47% in one of our most deprived wards. If we could move to the next slide, please. Thank you. So my role as cabinet member for A Fairer Future is broad and it encompasses a number of work streams and agendas, the majority of which sit in the wider public health team, but also includes arts and culture, museums and libraries. I have a particular passion for mental health, tackling poverty and food insecurity from my background before becoming a councillor. So on the slides, the circles in the blue box are those teams with the public health team. You have core public health in terms of health improvement, healthcare, public health and health protection. But then we also have the Tackling Poverty team, the Refugee and Asylum Seeker team, and the Equality Diversity team within public health. And this way of working very much helps to support our aims of reducing health inequalities across the borough. If we could move to the next slide, please. Thank you. So I have recently taken the role of chair of the Eat Well Be Active group. The previous chair was Councillor Louise Geertins, who is the leader of the council and also has multiple regional and national roles, including chair of the LGA. So you can imagine they're extremely big shoes to fill, but I'm really excited about getting involved and working in this area. So the diagram on the screen outlines the governance structure and working groups of the Eat Well Be Active programme of work. The Eat Well Be Active reference group reports into the Health and Wellbeing Board on an annual basis. There are 5 subgroups to Eat Well Be Active, including Cheshire West Food Partnership, the Healthy Places Working Group, Get Cheshire West Moving, Infant Feeding Strategy Group, and the Children and Young People's Healthy Weight Group. These are various other working groups and task and finish groups reporting into these as well. So whilst Eat Well Be Active is coordinated by public health, I think what we are really good at and we've managed to do really well is to enable and empower partner organisations to chair and coordinate the subgroups, some with small amounts of funding and others by just aligning to mutual priorities. Our CVS Cheshire West Voluntary Action is funded to coordinate and chair the food partnership. Get Cheshire West Moving is chaired by our leisure provider Brio, with the School Sports Partnership and Active Cheshire chairing the Children and Young People's Physical Activity Group. The ICB chair the Children and Young People's Healthy Weight Group, and a colleague in our planning department chairs the Healthy Places work. All the work is informed by and contributed to Altogether Active, which is our Cheshire and Mersey physical activity strategy. Altogether Fairer, which is our Cheshire and Merseyside Marmot work. Beyond, which is the Cheshire and Merseyside Children and Young People's Transformation Programme, and the Healthy Weight Declaration. I think this way of working really demonstrates how we try to work whole systems across the Eat Well Be Active work stream and really considering those wider determinants which influence healthy weight. So if we could move to the next slide, please. We think with multiple agendas, strategies and plans, some of which are shown here on the screen, they range from climate, poverty, land use, transport and planning to the local plan, borough plan and place plan. So covering a wide range of different agendas. Thank you. If we could move to the next slide. Thank you. To give some practical examples of work we have done in Cheshire West and Chester, Eat Well Be Active have been in place since 2016. Not long after this, the Welcome Network was set up, funded by Health Inequalities Funding and later by Public Health. This project aimed to support communities to address food insecurity through training, funding, capacity building and sharing of good practice. This was the start of our work to become a sustainable food place and the move from Welcome Network to the West Cheshire Food Partnership. So then in 2017, the council signed the Healthy Weight Declaration. This was a key moment for the council as it gave other departments and partners a reason to get involved in the healthy weight strategy agenda. Really supporting cross-departmental working. Strong working relationships were formed on the back of this, and Eat Well Be Active partners were key in developing the Healthy Weight Declaration Partner Pledge, mouthful, showing the commitment across a range of partners, organisations in this agenda. With a key focus on wider determinants, whole system working and that all-important move away from individual responsibility, Cheshire West and Chester Council commissioned and co-developed the Food Active, the Why Wait to Talk training. This was really forward thinking at the time, and it is now being delivered across various regions in England. You may hear more about this training during this conference, but in short, the training was aimed at enabling and empowering professionals to have positive conversations about weight, breaking down beliefs that weight is the sole responsibility of the individual, and instead focusing on the wide determinants, the environment in which we spend time, and the impacts on early life trauma. So building on strong cross-departmental relationships, particularly with the planning department, we launched a hot food takeaway guidance note in 2022, restricting new hot food takeaways close to secondary schools and in areas of high deprivation, high rates of childhood obesity, and high proliferation of other hot food takeaways. Then in 2024, with support from other Cheshire and Merseyside council teams and Sustain, we adopted a healthier advertising policy across all of our council-owned advertising sites and the then new Bush Shelter contract, joining 21 other local authorities who have done the same to reduce the influence that big companies can have on what we purchase and eat through clever marketing and advertising. So as well as supporting spaces and places where people live, we have done some really positive work in supporting schools and workplaces. The School Pledge, which is essentially the school version of the Healthy Weight Declaration, and you'll hear more about this today, has been received incredibly well, with 8 of our schools working towards the commitment set out in the pledge. It's fantastic to see what these schools are already doing to support the health and well-being of their pupils, staff and wider community, but even more impressive for them to commit already stretch time and resource to further improving their environment, their food offer and the amount of physical activity embedded throughout the day and the overall health and well-being of their school. So that's quite new, but very exciting. Through the Westminster Foundation funding, we have partnered with the National Bite Back team to work with young people across the borough to influence the food available in places where they spend time, particularly the vending offer. So we have been working with a great group of young people who have given up their time to advocate for positive change. They've already been an absolute inspiration. They've been great. So partners have also done some fantastic work on the physical activity agenda with the Joyful Movement campaign, which has run twice now, and every time for 1 month, nudging residents to find ways to move which are fun and enjoyable. The amount of partners who have engaged in these campaigns have been incredible, and they've been really positive and really helped by a joint vision and strong partnership working. So the final example I want to briefly talk about is the Get Cheshire West Moving strategy. This 3-year strategy launched earlier this year and was wholly co-produced by Eat Well Be Active partners and residents. The partners involved are shown on the next slide. So if we could just move on, thank you. So you can see the range of partners on here, not to mention the diverse council departments that have also been involved. So if we can move to the next slide, please. So the final couple of slides, just wanted to bring back to the role of system leaders. So for me, there are a number of key elements to this. I think system leaders have a responsibility to set the tone for an organisation to work more systematically and encourage staff and wider partners to embed systems and approaches in their work. Effective system leaders are advocates for taking a whole systems approach. They influence other leaders at all levels to shift the collective focus in the right direction and develop and maintain cross-departmental and cross-directorate relationships so that a shared understanding of goals and of the system. This has been a particular focus and example of positive practice from the Eat Well Be Active approach and the Healthy Weight Declaration, ensuring different agencies, partners and directorates of the council are engaged. So work across agendas and boundaries, working together for mutual gain. The slide I shared earlier about the various strategies and plans the Eat Well Be Active work links with shows how we do this in Cheshire West and Chester. So involve others, co-developing, using insight from lived and living experience. If the system values lived experience and community voice, then this helps to ensure that services and support are developed with communities, which is really, really important. On the same lines, it is important to enable and empower leaders at all levels. This is at individual level, community level, strategic, volunteers, residents and colleagues across the system, and support innovation, allowing people the freedom to be creative and to innovate can be transformational. So we could just move over to the next slide, thank you. And then finally, I've been asked to reflect on the role of an elected member, specifically in the context of system leadership. And these are just a few of my thoughts. So being a champion and advocate for what is important to our residents, to listen to and to act on local voices, challenge officers and team and hold them to account, extend the scope and opportunities to work beyond traditional boundaries, create shared vision or endeavour, bring people with you on a journey, and use the unique opportunities afforded to elected members to influence and change. And don't be scared to have difficult or challenging conversations. And just to the last slide, just for me to say thank you very much. I hope that was okay. And that's us from Cheshire West. Thank you.
Councillor Denson, that was fantastic. Thank you very much, and thank you very much for your leadership in this area as well. So we're going to move into questions for our first 3-4 speakers before the break. So a reminder just to put things in the chat if you want us to have a look at them. I'm going to kick us off if that's okay. And Robin, I'm going to come to you first. So just thinking about the 14 strategies and the 689 policies. Have you got a view? I don't know how controversial you want to be. Have you got a view as to why this has consistently failed to have an impact, including lack of implementation even of the policies? But there's been a lot of work on this agenda, but it's just not shifted the dial. So why is that focus always on individual rather than population health approaches, and why have these strategies and policies not worked?
That's such a big question, Matt, isn't it? We could spend the rest of the morning. I'll be brief, as obviously you want me to be brief. I think that obviously politicians don't get into power with a view to not taking some of these things forward. They often start with very well intentioned. They're often very committed. What seems to happen at some time from when these good intentions take place, I'm talking about politicians of all ilk, the pressure that they're put under in all different ways is immense. And what I think we're beginning to realise is, we'll be talking about commercial determinants of health across the morning, the intense lobbying done by parts of the food industry. I'm not going to say all the food industry, but when you start to appreciate how many opportunities, I mean, I've never personally, I've never even been to Westminster to give any recommendation to committees or talk about evidence anytime. If I worked at a senior level for a food company, you bet your bottom dollar I'd have met a few key people along the line, and that's a very simplistic way of putting it. But I think having that leadership we talked all about, the pressure that's put on it, how do we, I actually really like Catherine's slide with banners out there. Why aren't communities demanding healthier environments? Why aren't we demanding healthier food? Because if we do that, then the politicians have the support, they get the courage, despite what the food industry is often saying to them, they get the courage to take more progressive policies forward. I could talk about it a long time. That's my brief answer, Matt. Thanks for the question.
Thank you. And as you were saying before, I mean, I think that is what happened around smoke-free, particularly in Liverpool and the Northwest. The communities got angry and they progressed the agenda. Catherine, if I may come to you next, I'm interested to know if you've got a response to that challenge, but also more broadly, where do you think the research gaps are in this space? You talked about kind of lack of longer-term follow-up, but where are the research gaps, and how do we make research really work for us in terms of recommendations for action?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I concur with everything Robin just said. There are challenges in delivering obesity policy, part of it is about silo of government departments. So in order to be effective from a whole systems perspective, it isn't just the Department of Health and Social Care that needs to be involved in this agenda. It's nearly every department of government, and trying to make it a priority there. There is a systems thinking section in government, which is trying to break down siloed working, but obviously we're dealing with, you know, hundreds, thousands of years of how things are kind of structured and organized there. That's part of it. The food environment and forcing food manufacturers and those who are actually, you know, managing the food environment to take action ensemble is critical, I think, because none of them can do it in isolation, even if there's a will there. And they do talk about having a will. I'm not sure if that's just good comms and marketing, but I think they've asked themselves for some teeth to be put forward to sort of really force a shift. And I did make a response to somebody's question, which was about the government policy and so on. It needs to happen ensemble and together as one. On the question of what do you think the research gaps are? Well, I think there's lots of aspects of delivering whole systems approaches. We do need to invest in some outcomes evaluation around whole systems approaches, which is a complex thing to do. And it's not always going to suit, you know, the traditional randomized controlled trial approach to try to understand impacts and effects. Somebody's suggested ripple effects mapping. There's all sorts of quite innovative methodologies that could be applied in this sphere. I mentioned colleagues based at Leeds Beckett who are trying to get funding from cross-government, cross-councils, cross-research councils, UKRI, to do something quite innovative around developing a tool to support local authorities to use their systems maps beyond the qualitative. So once you've developed an understanding of your local system, to be able to model the effects of, if we pull this lever, and this lever, what's that likely to do to obesity in our population? And I think we probably need to be a bit bold in the research space, as well as being bold in terms of, yes, government policy and trying to push the public voice.
Thank you, Catherine. Arif, I'm going to come to you. Slightly multi-part question, I'm afraid, Arif, but I know you can cope with this. So, you talked about getting the Healthy Weight Declaration over the line was the easy bit, and then the hard bit kind of followed. So, I'm interested to know, on your reflection over the last 10 years, what's been the hardest challenge you've had to face so far around that Healthy Weight Declaration? Maybe coming back to Lisa's point about having those difficult and challenging conversations. That's my first question, but I'm just going to throw a few more things at you, if I may. So there's a couple of questions in the chat. How have we embedded prevention into early childhood and beyond? And also, let me just find my notes, sorry. How did you tackle that issue of double breakfasting without impacting on the wider offer?
Thanks, Matt. Yeah, lots to unpack there. In terms of the declaration, I mean, my politicians were totally on board, and I think it was at a time when obviously we had Jamie Oliver talking a lot about the sugar tax and all of that was going on, as I mentioned, and so it was at the forefront of our thinking, and the politicians were totally on board with sort of signing the declaration. But then it was, for me, it's always when you're trying to implement strategy and policy, you have to have the whole council behind every single department of the council on the same page and singing from the same hymn sheet. And you get into all sorts of different debates around sponsorship, advertising, all of those things. And as you can imagine, we're a tourist town, and we have lots of fast food outlets and we have lots of events with all sorts of sponsorships going on. So it's trying to make sure that when you're trying to then implement those policies, that you're not getting any resistance, I guess, from certain departments when you're doing that. I think we've got to a place where people will now come to me and ask me the question of should we do this? Should we not do this? So I think we've really moved that on. So it's about winning the hearts and minds across the entire council so that you can implement strategy and policy without the resistance from middle managers and others on the ground, and for them to then also ask me the question and for us to have a debate. Interestingly enough, I've got a session with all the heads of service across the whole of the council next week, where I'm going to take a number of scenarios around advertising and sponsorship policies and get a discussion going about what should we allow and what shouldn't we allow as the council in terms of those things. So it's that, and of course now we've got it into our planning policy around, we won't have fast food outlets, new fast food outlets approved near schools that have high levels of obesity. So that, I think that's been my biggest challenge in answer to your question, is making sure the entire council is on the same page. It's a vast organisation with lots of bits to it, and making sure everyone's on the same page. Early years, absolutely really important. We have Better Start in Blackpool, which is the 0 to 3 age group. So we've got that programme targeting the best start in life, and making sure we're tackling the nutritional, the emotional development, the speech and language development. All of that in the 0 to 3 age group is hugely important to make sure that we then get the public health improvements that we want in the longer term as part of that. And for me, for us, it was also about tackling that food poverty in our primary schools, and hence that's why, for over a decade now, we've been funding those free school breakfasts as part of the program for the early years interventions. Which brings me on to your next question is double breakfasting, and we want to keep it universal. The scheme is universal, so it's for anyone that needs a free school breakfast. So kids that come into the classroom hungry will get a breakfast. But the issue for me was we were finding that some kids were getting 2 breakfasts. So they were being fed at home, but then also coming into the classroom and being given another breakfast. What that was creating was the schools were ordering for 100% of their kids when they didn't need to order for 100%. They needed to order for those kids that required the breakfast. So what we decided was we would give every child the option of having fluoridated milk and a piece of fruit. We thought that was important. But what we wanted to do was to limit the actual breakfast to the kids that needed it. The way we did that was to use the schools. The schools know which kids need the breakfast. So we, instead of us providing those breakfasts directly at 100%, we've said to the schools, look, you can decide. We'll give you the money. You decide which children you want to feed with that breakfast. So that's the way we've done it. It's taken a bit of time to do that. And I think now we've got more control over it, because I've got one person in my team that is working with every single school, and we've got 36 schools, remember, to make sure that that is happening appropriately and that the content is right as well. Because over the years, we had this, drift into unhealthy products like brioche that we were getting from France for some reason. I don't know why. So there was all the carbon miles involved in it as well. So we wanted to get away from brioche and malt loaf on the menu to actually something healthier. And so I think we've got far more control over the content and which children are getting it. Sorry, long answer, but yeah.
Thank you, Arif. But it strikes me that speaks to that kind of dispersed leadership whole systems
Absolutely.
approach. Anyway, you want the schools to own this agenda, don't you?
Yeah.
Thank you, Arif. Councillor Denson, if I may come to you with a couple of quick questions. So life in local authority is hard, right? There's so much going on. There's so many competing priorities. How then can elected members best champion that healthier environments agenda and make sure it's top of the list or towards the top of the list in wider policy and planning discussions?
Thank you. Yeah, it is definitely tough at the moment. And it's about being ready for difficult conversations and challenging others, and sticking to our guns and doing what is right and what's best for our residents and communities. Using local voice, data and insight to support evidence-based arguments, and using the levers available to us, really, examples of like the LGA, the new planning policy, locally, an example for us, moving into devolution and things like that. But it's really important to stick to our guns and do what's right and listen to our communities. Thank you.
Thank you. And this might be slightly unfair, so feel free to pass. But are there any specific challenges you feel you've faced so far around hot food takeaway guidance or the food advertising space?
Yeah, I'm not sure I should be declaring this right now, but I will anyway. I'll share it for the purpose of the meeting. But you know what it's like at the moment for local authorities with budgeting challenges, and we'd put all that in place around our advertising, and it was questioned whether we should relax that slightly because of income. Absolutely not. And that's where these challenges and these sticking to our guns and having these challenging conversations really come into place. That we can't go back on things like that has detriment effect to our residents, and to our children. So I think that's one of my most recent rants and challenges that I've had in a budgeting meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. And I've no doubt that same conversation, same discussion, same challenge will be faced in every single local authority. There's the balance between doing the right thing for our communities versus how do we get the budget to balance. Thank you. I'm just aware of time, so I'm just going to try and ask one last question for everybody to put some thoughts into before we break. And it's based on community engagement involvement and also competing priorities. And Arif, I only half give you permission to go off on one on alcohol. So there are so many competing priorities in that health space that we're faced with, whether that's physical activity, healthy weight, alcohol, smoking, all of which are enormously harmful, and all of which can be very challenging for our communities. So how do we help our communities prioritize, and how do we wind our communities up and set them off in the right direction in those spaces, and without getting it wrong? Because I guess it could be very confusing for our communities, and we could also have too much stuff going on at the same time, which we're not going to be able to do to best effect. So how do we best help our communities to prioritize but activate their voices? Robin, I'll come to you first, if that's okay.
No, that's fine. I mean, I've done quite a lot of qualitative research with communities, and I've learned an awful lot in having those discussions. And actually, you do find, for example, that people are pretty much wound up about the huge amount of hot food takeaways in their areas. They want to have healthier food. They actually want to do that. And I learned a lot from having an older group of people my age saying, well, the kids, they don't really understand healthy eating. They need teaching. You go to the kids and they say, well, the only reason we go to McDonald's is nowhere else safe to go. It's a good space for us. So I think the key for me, though, is to make sure that the food, Arif made a point about this, that you cannot separate the food insecurity agenda from the healthy weight agenda. You've got to have that discussion at the same time, because for some people, just getting food on the plates is a key issue. So you've got to balance it. You've got to get your language right. I'll stop there because I know other people want to contribute. Thanks for the question.
Thanks, Robin. Catherine?
Yeah, I mean, I think things that drive overweight and obesity are often the same as things that drive other health issues. So I think, keeping it brief, the way in is to try to tackle multiple things when you're kind of engaging with this all at the same time.
Yeah, thank you, Catherine. Arif?
Yeah, I was going to make a similar point. It's the commercial determinants of ill health, and they all do overlap, don't they? And that's why, I mean, I'm having that debate next week with the heads of service around the whole advertising policy stuff within the council, and I've got a range of things I want to discuss with them and land with them, which includes, you know, food as well as obesity, gambling, all the other addictions that we want to talk about. So yeah, it's all wrapped up in the same thing. Do you know what? Our communities understand this, and they know they're on our side. So we need to harness their voice when it comes to lobbying and advocacy. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Arif. And Lisa.
Sorry, I've been scribbling all kinds of points here, so I hope I get them in some kind of order. First of all, I'm thinking of my daughter. I've got 3 teenage daughters, and I was really shocked about the food that was available in high schools for lunches for them. That was something that I was quite taken aback by, how poor the food offer was in schools. But also, we, as a council, we have a group of people with lived experience residents called our Community Inspirers, and they're under our Tackling Poverty team. But they have set up a group called the Beans on Toast group, and that came from a guy saying that all he wanted to be able to do was to afford to be able to have beans on toast and sit warm in his home. So we've taken a really huge focus on local voice and about people and about their needs, and it's a real bottom up. It's, you know, it's about really listening to people and what their needs are, and not telling them what they want and what they need, and let them educate professionals as to the needs and wants and how they want to live their lives as well. So sorry, I could go on forever ranting about this. I'm really, really passionate about lived experience and really listening to people. So thank you.
Lisa, thank you so much. I think that's a really powerful point. Our communities know the answer already. Maybe it's our professionals that need a bit of education and support to make the change. Colleagues, I just want to thank you all for your contributions this morning. Fantastic 4 speakers. Please show our appreciation. We're going to break now for 15 minutes, and we're going to come back at 11:05, if that's okay. And then just a reminder, there is a minute's silence at 11 o'clock. So see you all at 11:05. Thank you. Okay, welcome back, everybody. It's 11:05. We're running ever so slightly late, so we will get started straight away. First of all, a great pleasure to introduce Matthew Philpott, who's the Exec Director at the Health Equalities Group, who's going to be giving us a brief overview of driving place-based partnerships through prevention. Matthew, over to you.
Thanks very much, Matt. Thanks for the introduction, and a huge thanks for chairing today's event. Something you've done many times for us. You've been absolutely fantastic leads DPH for Food Active. So thanks for all of your input today and throughout the year. And from Health Equalities Group, a huge thanks to all of today's speakers and our team, in particular, our Food Active lead, Nicola Calder, and Chloe Hyam-Smith, who has coordinated this conference today. So thanks to all of you. Next slide, please. So I'm going to pick up on just a few of the things that actually our first session have talked about, in particular that correlation between unhealthy weight and deprivation. And we're going to look at a couple of case studies from partners that we've been working with for quite a number of years now, in terms of taking more of a place-based approach in terms of addressing unhealthy weight. And we've heard this from Robin, from Arif in particular, in a lot of detail. You know, we're aware many areas of the country, people are held back by real structural issues that are significantly beyond their control. That could be lack of access to green space, poor quality housing, significant variations in public transport, and there are these really acute barriers. We kind of got into this in terms of the Q&A previously, these acute barriers in terms of actually being able to afford or even having access to healthier food. And, you know, that is way beyond somebody's lifestyle choices. It's something which is really quite structural that we need to look at. So there's this growing recognition that we might be able to take more of a place-based approach in promoting healthier environments and helping to prevent some of those drivers of less healthy weight and wider health inequalities. And, you know, Robin, I think, touched on this really clearly. This is around improving environments. It's about trying to drill down into those obesogenic environments. It's much more around more environment framing and less about victim blaming. So what could we do in terms of using local levers? We can think about potentially improving the food environment through planning, and there are a lot of really interesting kind of opportunities presented by the revised National Planning Policy Framework. We've already talked a little bit about restricting unhealthy marketing. A lot of our local authorities, certainly in Cheshire and Merseyside, but increasingly across many of our local authority areas in the UK, are adopting unhealthy marketing policies, and also support around active environments. I've just seen something pop into my inbox just now, whereby there is apparently a new consultation on a cycling and walking investment strategy, which has gone live today. The NHS 10-year plan that was published in July this year, it kind of goes some way to recognising the importance of upstream prevention. Quite a bit about prevention, perhaps a little more around secondary prevention, admittedly, than perhaps some of us were hoping for. But it's very clear that some of those changes that we're looking for are those that are going to be made through cross-sector collaboration and partnerships that are grounded in local systems. So why is this of consequence to unhealthy weight? Next slide, please. There's a huge correlation, unfortunately, between unhealthy weight and the social gradient, and it's a huge public health issue for us. And the NCMP data that was released last week, I'm afraid, is showing that things are going in the wrong direction. It shows that obesity prevalence is now at its highest since 2006, and there's this widening gap in obesity rates between the most and least deprived areas. And this worrying increase in terms of young people from reception year to year 6 in terms of increasing unhealthy weight. People living in low income communities experience significantly disproportionate exposure to unhealthy food and drink advertising, as much as 6 times more frequently per kilometre in the most deprived areas. We've touched on this idea of access to food, households living in food deserts, and 14% of UK households experiencing food insecurity, and 28% of people living in the most deprived neighbourhoods having the least access to green space. So things are really stacked against a lot of people being able to make those choices. And without targeted, sustained action, inequalities in healthy growth and development are likely to intensify through childhood and persist into adulthood. Next slide, please. So what have we done about this Health Equalities Group, and through our Food Active programme, we have developed quite a number of frameworks that are in addition to the local authority healthy weight declaration. The first of these is the partner pledge, and we're going to be hearing from Debbie Watson in a moment about the brilliant work that has been going on in Warrington, which is really grounded in partnerships across all different stakeholders within their system. We've also developed an NHS version of the Healthy Weight Declaration that was off some original work in the Southwest. And we have a number of NHS organisations, all different types of trusts, who have started to adopt the NHS Healthy Weight Declaration. And then our most recent prevention framework is our Schools Pledge for a Healthy and Active Future. It's something which is being rolled out to schools across Cheshire and Merseyside, and Carrie-Anne's going to talk us through that in a moment. Next slide, please. And a really interesting development has been kind of almost a coming together of two of our frameworks. It's the Local Authority Declaration and our NHS Declaration. So very much trying to use these frameworks in terms of taking a place-based approach to unhealthy weight. And a couple of examples of this, we've had Northumberland County Council and North Tyneside Council coming together with Northumbria Healthcare NHS Foundation Trust. So adopting at the same time, trying to work to these issues in terms of that system-wide approach using those frameworks, and a similar coming together in terms of Milton Keynes Council and their local hospital trust as well. Next slide, please. So in terms of this next section of the conference, we're going to be hearing from Debbie Watson, who is DPH for Warrington. Debbie's going to talk about Warrington's Healthy Weight Declaration, all that fabulous partnership work which is going on across their system. Carrie-Anne Tunner, who's Associate Director of Population Health for NHS Cheshire and Merseyside, will talk us through the Schools Pledge work, which is being funded by the ICB and rolled out across Cheshire and Merseyside. And then a really, really interesting piece of work for us, which will be presented by Professor Ewan Moore, who's Clinical Director of the North East and North Cumbria ICB. This is our first region-wide Healthy Weight Declaration that we're working with the NENC ICB on. And Ewan's going to talk us through this regional commitment around healthier weight. So that's it from me. Thanks for everyone for joining today, and it's back to Matt to introduce Debbie. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Matthew. Yeah, the importance of place-based approaches and just reflecting on the opportunities presented within the 10-year plan, and particularly neighbourhood health, whatever neighbourhood health means and however we define neighbourhoods and however we define health perhaps is something we can come to. But yeah, great pleasure in introducing our first case study from my mate Debbie Watson, Director of Public Health at Warrington. Over to you, Debbie.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks, Matthew. Morning, everyone. Lovely to be here this morning. So I am here to talk a little bit about Warrington's journey in adopting the Healthy Weight Declaration and how we developed a collaborative whole system approach using our multi-agency partners and also importantly our residents in terms of developing our strategies for both Eat Well, Feel Well, which is our healthy weight strategy, and our Active Warrington strategy. The aim of the presentation really is to give you some examples of how we progressed across the system, some of the key learning, and also some of our future plans to strengthen and sustain our approach. Next slide, please. So won't go through these kind of data in any detail, but it does, overweight and obesity does remain one of our most pressing public health challenges in Warrington. We know that it's not simply a result of individual choices. We've talked a lot about that this morning. And we know that the causes are very complex, multifactorial, and shaped by lots of different things, biological, behavioural and lifestyle. But they're also further influenced by the social, cultural and the economical situations that people live in, really. So adopting the declaration, we did commit to creating a much healthier environment that supports our individuals, families and communities to achieve and maintain a healthy weight through coordinated actions. Next slide, please. So in Warrington, what we decided from the get-go really was that we would start with collaboration to co-produce our plans and strategies for our communities, and making it a Warrington Healthy Weight Declaration rather than a local authority healthy weight declaration, with a real aim to ensure that we garnered commitment and partnership action from the whole system, whilst showing our leadership role as a local authority. What we did at the same time is we aligned and co-developed 2 of our strategies that I've mentioned on the last slide. And you can see there that we had an aim of real cross-sector collaboration, closely linked with a unified approach to promote physical activity, create environments that support healthier choices and improve access as well, and framed around reducing health inequalities throughout our whole life course. Next slide, please. So the adoption process was, we did take our time with this because we wanted to ensure that co-production was the foundation in which we built that, and we started with co-production with multi-agency partners and the public back in March 2023. We had a number of workshops which built some really great momentum with partners. We also shared best practice from other areas, and thank you to colleagues for sharing that best practice. And we also had some active discussions around what we want Warrington to look like, where we want Warrington to be, and absolutely thinking about how we can link and build from existing strategies around where we want to be. We really did want people to give that individual and organisational pledge to the process from the start. We went to primary care and voluntary sector networks. We presented within key clinical teaching times. We also had additional steering groups with partners and community members. But we also spent quite a bit of time on a public consultation. That's around focus groups. We had an online survey, but we also engaged with some of our underrepresented communities, and we collated and put together some of those thoughts. And actually, that was really key for us, the public consultation, in the way that we framed the local authority work and the work across the system. And due to that, we did actually change the way that we talked about the work that we were doing. The local residents wanted us to stop talking about weight and talk more about feeling better and having a good life. So we changed our healthy weight strategy to be eat well, feel well as a consequence of that, and didn't actually mention the word weight. And our residents were telling us they were much more likely to engage around that. So the 3 aims really around our co-production from the start was wanting to involve residents as partners, as equals, building on our relationships that we already had, and building up. Recognising, obviously, obesity is the complex issue that it is. You know, I think about the families that I've met when we were talking about developing this piece of work, and you know, they wanted to eat well, but you know, it was a real struggle because of the cost, because of access, because of lots of things that they were bombarded with that we've talked about earlier. So really championing that inclusivity, that equity, ensuring that we listen to our diverse voices within our residents, especially those who are most affected by health inequalities and this issue. And we wanted to deliver that with transparency and trust, and actually spent quite a bit of time on co-production. Next slide, please. So you can see here that through the process, we actually had, as well as the local authority, 6 partner organisations who adopted and committed and signed up to the Healthy Weight Partner Pledge. And they're listed there, some key partners for us, including our Voluntary Action, Warrington Wolves Community Foundation, our Youth Zone, our Health Watch. And that picture there is a day in July when we officially launched our Healthy Weight Declaration. We plan to continue. We are continuing to engage other partners, including NHS Hospital, to adopt the partner pledge as well, but really does strengthen and reinforces our system-wide approach. Next slide, please. Here are just some examples of some of the partnership pledges that have happened. Improving catering, we've worked alongside our leisure provider around vending, for example, and that's led to the removal of some energy drinks, full sugar drinks, more water-based, low sugar drink options, looking at snacks of less than 100 calories. This has been a real driver to get some of those conversations going. Our environmental health officers have been brilliant around promoting our healthy catering principles. Our workplace health work was really rejuvenated as a result of this. You know, we've got a really good offer around our staff workplace wellbeing, additional incentives for staff to wear active soles as part of their everyday movement throughout the working day, and also this is a really important one around community engagement. We really want to ensure that we've got inclusive activities which support local residents and actually involve them in what's happening. And an example of that being, we've got a significant work around food literacy with community food champions delivering some knowledge within some of our communities, which has been an absolutely amazing programme. Next slide, please. Okay, so in terms of governance, just wanted to say that we had, I suppose, a feeling that driving small working groups and engagement groups forward would be a better way of pushing through this implementation process. And actually, it's worked really well because we've been able to do distributed leadership across the whole of the strategy groups. So we've got partnership leads in each of these areas, who are not local authority leads, but are leads across the whole system. And that has been really, really useful in terms of ensuring that we've got that distributed leadership, and we've continued to get that momentum, which has been great. Next slide, please. So examples of where we are 1 year on, we've just done a report to our Health and Wellbeing Board around what we've achieved 1 year on from being successful with the declaration. We've continued to lead on expanding access to affordable food through initiatives like the community pantries and the Vantry, which is our mobile food provision. We've really linked that to reducing food insecurity, which is also a key area of priority in our poverty strategy and our poverty work. And building on that, we've got, as I say, a community cooking engagement programme, which has been sustained around a Train the Trainer, which has really been great around engaging residents with the knowledge and skills that they have told us that they want within our communities. We've also done quite a lot of training to affordable food providers around availability and visibility of healthy food and drink within their settings. And alongside that, there's been some community mapping around what offers are underway. Next slide, please. Sorry, I'm romping through this. I want to make sure I stay in time. Other examples are that we've, as I've mentioned about the smaller working groups, we've really ensured that we've had cross-sector engagement that has really expanded across primary care. Next slide, please, because I know Matt's going to tell me I've got a couple of minutes left. Okay, can we go to the next slide, which is key learning? Sorry, can we move back to key learning? Thank you. So slide before that was talking about what key learning that we've had. So definitely co-production building ownership And we've talked a little bit about the inclusive language, because that really does matter, and that's helped us to reframe positively our strategy work and frame our issues as a systemic issue, not an individual issue. And also structured framework to support delivery using the Healthy Weight Declaration 16 commitments. Smaller working groups to drive action and celebrating our success have been really important, and also cross-sector engagement. So if you take me to my final slide, because I can feel Matt's beady eyes on me, I will share these slides. But just to say that, you know, there continues to be challenges and tough conversations that happens around this place. We know that it's not an easy conversation, but there are also amazing opportunities, and there's been absolutely amazing moments built into the experience of our residents through this process. The declaration not being an end and being very much a journey and start of a cultural shift within some of our partnerships in Warrington. And my reflection is that this has made us in Warrington a stronger network, and it isn't just a policy, it is a statement of values. And we've got to believe, and it says that we believe that health is everyone's business, and we're willing to make that work and make that happen. Thank you, Matt. Apologies, I ran over a little bit there.
No, thank you, Debbie. And I think we gave you a tough ask trying to fit the incredible work you're doing in Warrington into 10 minutes. So thank you, and apologies for cutting you off. Well done, Debbie. We're going to carry straight on. So great pleasure in introducing Kerry-Ann, who's going to talk about empowering schools to champion healthy weight and active lives. Kerry-Ann, over to you.
Fab, thanks, Matt. So hi, everyone. I'm Kerry-Ann Turner. I'm the Associate Director of Population Health for Cheshire and Merseyside ICB. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the Schools Pledge. So next slide. So this is just a little bit about the Integrated Care Board's Population Health Programme. So just a brief overview of kind of our 4 pillars of work. And I suppose the really interesting thing about the Schools Pledge is, although it sits within Pillar 2, which is all about supporting healthy behaviours, it actually sits really well with both Pillar 1, particularly that whole child poverty agenda, as Arif mentioned earlier, and then also Pillar 3. It's been really, really influential in terms of starting to tackle some of those healthcare inequalities. Actually, we know that there are massive inequalities, particularly around type 2 diabetes and obesity for children and young people. So this is a real kind of whole system programme of work that we're interested in getting involved in as an ICB. So next slide. Okay, so Schools Pledge, just a bit of a brief introduction to it. So it's an evidence-based framework for healthier weight and well-being. There are 9 core commitments. It takes a whole school approach. So in the same way as we're talking about whole system approaches, even when we're working in schools, we need to think about how we influence staff, pupils, families and communities, because we know that some of the amazing work that we can do in schools will be undone if we don't bring families and communities with us. So it was initially piloted in Knowsley and Leeds, and we're now rolling it out across Cheshire and Merseyside. So the ICB has funded a pilot approach, which is around rolling out the piece of work to the most deprived communities. So again, very much fits with our health inequalities agenda. And it's very focused on those schools that are in our 20% most deprived areas. It's about strong collaboration with local authority public health teams. So this is all about partnership working, not necessarily that we own it as an NHS organisation, but we're really kind of facilitating that engagement and work across the system. It's about providing support to schools, so tailored advice, digital resources, action planning. I think that's definitely something that I've learned working within the healthy weight system, is that actually as a public health system, sometimes we have to really sometimes almost feed the system with the ways of working. People are very busy, they've got competing priorities, so the more resources and support we can give them, the more that we'll start to see change. So we've got a network of schools sharing best practice, and it aligns with all of the ICB priorities and very much the priorities of the NHS, which is around shifting more to prevention rather than focusing on treatment. So next slide. So as we have there are 9 core commitments, and key ones really is leadership. We all know that we won't see change without our leaders really buying into this. believing in it and seeing it as really important. Food and drink provision, more movement and active travel, and overall well-being. So it's very much about positive body image. It's not necessarily focusing on weight, but it's very much focused on how we make ourselves feel good by eating great food and moving more often. Next slide. So we've had a bit of a phased rollout. So you'll see there that we're moving between phases where we're bringing more schools on board, and then particularly developing resources for SEND schools and pupils. And actually that's really important for us, because we do see within our specialist weight management services that we do have much higher rates of children and young people with weight problems with learning disabilities. So it's really, really crucial that schools can influence this agenda. We have lots of issues within our services where we find, a little bit like Arif was mentioning, that we have parents that are feeding children with learning disabilities, schools are feeding children, and actually there's miscommunication. So actually some of the ways that schools are creating food environments is very much influencing the weight of children. So when we talk about kind of taking responsibility, it is really important that we look at how our schools are providing access to food, but also communicating and supporting parents. Next slide. So this is about really strong regional collaboration across Cheshire and Merseyside. So it is very much co-designed and delivered with all 9 local authority public health teams. So we absolutely couldn't do this without the support of our public health teams, and they have been really instrumental in making this the success that it is today. It's about a shared commitment to improving school health and wellbeing across Cheshire and Merseyside. We've now got 50 schools taking part. And as we said before, we're really focusing on the schools with the highest deprivation. And you would kind of think, oh, well, surely all schools are quite similar. Clearly the pupils will be different, but actually what's delivered in schools should be quite standard. I was visiting a school in Ellesmere Port last week, and you know, even the head teacher said that he'd come from an outstanding school in a really affluent area, and the children in his school would really just take it for granted, everything that they're being offered in the school in Ellesmere Port. But actually, when he came to that school, the pupils weren't being offered the same types of opportunities that actually the children within the more affluent areas. So we are still seeing that variation, even in kind of the types of interventions that you would think would be quite standard now across the system. As I said before, it's about local partnerships. So actually, it's public health leads have been really crucial in bringing schools on board, launch events, and promoting local initiatives. And it's been, we're really aligning it with some of the regional initiatives, particularly around Healthy Schools, Eat Well, Move More, Gulp and Active Sefton. So this is not about us kind of trying to duplicate, undermine what's happening locally, but it's about bringing all of that great work together, particularly within the school system. And collaboration have driven that consistency, local relevance and early success across diverse primary and SEND school settings. Next slide. So some of the benefits for schools. So as I said before, that comprehensive support pack. And I think as a public health system, we can't underestimate how useful that is. When schools are really busy with all of their competing priorities, sometimes they just need to be given the information and told what they need to do, and they'll be really welcoming of that. This is not about us dictating to them, but it is very much about us supporting them. There's a Schools Pledge network, so actually there's loads of opportunity for sharing ideas, best practice, and really learning from each other. And some of this work actually is quite risky. Schools have taken risks. The school that I was in recently had a pond that was seen as extremely controversial by some head teachers, but actually that was very much about getting children and young people out into green spaces, enjoying the environment. And that school is really leading the way in terms of how they're managing some of the risks around that, whilst actually giving children from really deprived communities great opportunities. There's online networking meetings. There's also tailored support, particularly a really strong leadership team within the Schools Pledge team that are supporting schools with any challenges that they're experiencing. And then we're doing lots of celebration and progress. So as we said, we had an amazing launch event in Ellesmere Port recently, and lots of other great launch events across Cheshire and Merseyside that are really bringing parents into schools and celebrating the ambitions that the schools have got in terms of working with the pupils and the parents. Next slide. So some of the really interesting highlights from across the region there you'll see. So we've got lots of different examples of great work that's happening. So in Cheshire East there we've got family cooking classes, Cheshire West, whole school assemblies and pupil workshops. Halton have got wellbeing weeks, and we're all there, Fit Friday assemblies and active fairs. There are lots of kind of fun activities, and this is really about engaging children and young people, whether it is kind of singing songs, whether it's kind of running on the spot in assemblies. It's all about making this fun and accessible and a positive experience, particularly around movement. We really need to ensure that it's positive for children and young people so that they can take that through their life course. Next slide. Some more examples there, as we said, everything from salad bar tasting right through to wellbeing ambassadors and water only policies. And we are hoping to produce some videos which will give some great examples of some of the work that's happening in Cheshire and Merseyside. Next slide. So here are some of the great pictures, all the kids smiling, enjoying this, and actually just really seeing it as a positive experience. Often it can be quite a depressing area working in healthy weight. We often have to deliver very negative messages, but actually this is about us being really positive. Children are learning at the same time as kind of getting positive messages and enjoying themselves. Next slide. So next steps and future plans. So we're hoping to build a network of schools to share best practice. We're hoping to expand the schools pledge and the tailored resources, particularly for SEND schools. And we want the development of a digital schools pledge hub. We've got an early stage evaluation underway with the Open University. So we're really hoping that that will be able to demonstrate the impact. And we're encouraging long-term cultural shifts in attitudes towards health and well-being in school and community. And hopefully that will really be a long-term foundation that schools can continue to run with. And we're continuously building capacity through collaboration, resources, shared learning. This is about us really engaging in that whole system approach and ensuring that we spread lots of our learning across different parts of the system. I think that's me finished.
Great, Kerry-Ann, thank you so much. I think it's easy to be motivated when you see happy, smiling faces of our young people, actually. So there's some amazing work going on there. Well done. But we're going to move straight on to our third and final case study. But just a reminder, for any questions that you want answering for Debbie, Kerry-Ann, or Ewan, please pop them in the chat, and we'll come to them either live or follow up afterwards. But delighted to welcome our third speaker in this session, Professor Ewan Mull, Chief Pharmacist and Director of Medicines and Pharmacy, North East and North Cumbria Integrated Care Board. That's a mouthful, but Ewan, over to you.
Thanks very much, Matt. And you've helpfully pointed out that one of my roles is chief pharmacist, so you can guarantee that drugs will be mentioned at some point in this presentation. We move on to the next slide, please. Excuse me. So this is a bit of the background and the context as to why we're in the place that we're in. So I think Kerry-Ann helpfully talked about the role of the NHS in this, and I think that's a really important part of the discussion that I want to bring out today. So the context for us is that when ICBs were created, one of the roles that we were kind of tasked with doing that nobody else in the system was really given that particular focus on was being a strategic commissioner, but with a specific lens on health inequalities. And from all the work that we did, we found that there was very little that drives health inequalities quite as much as this agenda. So it became clear this was something that we needed to have a bit of a priority on. And we had a really great conference on the commercial determinants of health, where we also talked about alcohol, gambling, tobacco, and healthy weight. And it was at that conference that I really kind of got interested in this area. I just thought this was absolutely fascinating stuff, and I was really keen to do it. So we've expanded the role of the Healthy Weight Treating Obesity work stream. We've developed a strategy that I'll go and talk about as well. There's still lots more to do in terms of embedding and delivering on it, but it's been a really important point, really important part of our addressing healthcare inequalities. Next slide, please. So when we decided we needed to develop a strategy, one of the things we wanted to do was make sure that we were not building over good stuff that was already happening. We weren't trying to get rid of anything good that was already happening. And the complexity of our geographical areas, we've got lots of local authorities. And so lots of those local authorities are already doing and have done great work for a very, very long time. What we wanted to do was something that was complementary and in a really, really complex system. Now, one of the challenges in that early on, when you can see that some of the people that were involved, and I'll talk more about some of the people that have been involved in the group, but straight away we've got NHS services coming together with public health, and we speak different languages. And actually the first job was, how do we make sure that we're not doing kind of prevention versus treatment and which one is more worthy of investment, but actually how do we have a strategy across the whole thing that puts appropriate resources in appropriate places to get the best outcome for our population. So we developed this strategy about aligning and supporting work that was already happening, but focusing on areas where we thought there was added value to the at-scale work. And that's where this kind of healthy weight declaration has come from, really feeling that that would be added value on top of what was already happening. So next slide, please. So within the strategy, we've got 4 themes that we've developed. So one is the need for a whole system approach, again, referencing that sort of prevention versus treatment debate that we always had. And the need for the whole system to kind of come together and agree on an approach that was really, really important. Secondly, and that's kind of where this presentation is really based at, was the advocacy associated with the food environment and all the challenges within that lots of other people have spoken about today. Thirdly, we recognise in terms of NHS service provision, well, not just NHS service provision, but local authority commission service provision as well, was not where it needed to be. In fact, it's a long way from where it needed to be. Certainly the kind of the tiered approach probably feels quite out of date now, and I think was building towards quite a specialist kind of secondary care, very healthcare interventional focused service that probably was fine when you had a very small percentage of the population who lived with overweight and obesity. But given where we are now, we were putting quite a lot of resource into quite expensive, quite kind of small NHS service provision. So we needed to expand that. We need to completely change that. But actually, a really important part of that was the workforce. So when we say workforce, there's lots of different aspects of this. So firstly, there's helping the NHS workforce, which is the biggest single employer by some distance in our population, helping our own workforce live more healthily, but also then changing the way that our workforce communicated with people they interacted with about healthy weight and overweight and obesity. For example, we found that lots of our healthcare professionals, me included, were quite comfortable having a conversation with a patient about how much they drank, how much they smoked. Far less comfortable having a conversation with somebody about their weight, because that felt more personal and it felt more judgmental. And so we realized there was some work to be done. And then obviously we've got the enablers. How we speak to our population about it is a really important thing, and how we have the data and intelligence to know that we're actually making a difference and that we're putting the interventions and the services in the right place. So next slide, please. So there's one obvious game changer since we started this work, which is that we now have drugs. And I have to say, I originally got into this space of working in healthy weight and treating obesity because at that time there were no drugs. And I was getting a bit bored of just being a pharmacist, and I wanted to do something that was very different. So my boss said to me, well, we need a lead for obesity. And I went, oh, that sounds good. There's no drugs involved in that. And now clearly we're in a very different space. This has been the mother of all disruptions. I've been a pharmacist for 25 years and I've never seen anything like this come along. And it brings one of the real positives about this is it brings it front and center of people's minds. It's very much a part of the public discourse in a way that it probably wasn't before. But it's created loads of really interesting clinical and ethical questions that we as a group we've really had to kind of wrestle with. It's a fantastic technology when it's used well, but we know it's very often not being used well and not being used right. And it's also creating a two-tier healthcare system, because we now know there's 2 million people in England accessing Mounjaro privately every month. So we are creating further health inequalities as a result of that. And then, of course, we don't know the long-term effects of people cycling on and off, both weight cycling up and down, but taking the medicine on and off. So, and we're not always getting it to the people that we need it. So, so there's lots of work to be done on that. The other element of this is that it brought in some really understandable public health frustration, because people see that we've underinvested in prevention, we've underinvested in this agenda for a very long time. But then guess what? When there's a drug that comes out with a huge American drug company behind it, suddenly we manage to find tens, hundreds of millions of pounds to put into it, when actually we might not be in this place if we'd invested that money wiser earlier on. So really interesting discussions in our group. It does elicit some very, very strong views. Okay, next slide, please. So the work that we've done with Food Active, we already had a good relationship with Food Active. And as I say, that kind of whole system advocacy thing was one of the things that we recognised, that the NHS needed to step more into this space. We couldn't just stand back and go, well, this is a public health problem, this is a public health priority, because it just spans almost every service that the NHS offers. And if we didn't step into this space, then it was going to overwhelm the NHS. It still is threatening to overwhelm the NHS. So there's the need for the provision of NHS services, but I think there's also something really important about the NHS brand, which still, although public satisfaction with the NHS is at an all-time low, the NHS brand still carries a degree of credibility with the public, and therefore having an NHS brand on something like this actually does make a difference. So we looked at all the potential benefits, we looked at working across that whole partnership, how we can influence, how it might influence our advocacy and lobbying approach and so on. And we said actually we think a high-level declaration does all the things that we need it to do. It adds on top of what's already existing in lots of different places. It adds the NHS brand. It gives it a level of priority and visibility that we think is going to be really, really, really important. And it's going to enable lots of good work to happen underneath it. So next slide, please. So we've taken a very collaborative approach. So we've got obviously ourselves in the NHS, we've got the Directors of Public Health, we've got the office, we've got OHID as well, we've got Food Active, and all of us collaboratively have helped to set up these co-production workshops. And I have to say, I made it to 2 of the 4 workshops, and it was absolutely fascinating to hear the discussion, because I've never been in a room where there was that breadth of expertise. So we had people from planning, we had people from kind of active transport, we had public health, we had dietitians, we had psychiatrists, we had all sorts of people in the room. And actually it was really fascinating to just get to that kind of shared understanding of what the problem is, but what could we meaningfully do on top of what each of those different parts of the puzzle is already doing. And we had over 100 people attending all the workshops across the 4. We did 4 because of our geography, because you couldn't possibly get everybody together as one, but actually it helped because the conversation organically went down different roads in different places. So next slide, please. Okay, so what they were an opportunity to find out what was already happening, gather feedback, identify themes to underpin the framework. We've still got some more work to do, and the next slide will tell you what kind of comes next with this, but really, really positive, some really useful themes that came out of it about prioritising prevention and unifying vision, embedding policy, and really strong systems leadership. So next slide, please. Okay, so the next work that we've got to do is pull all of that together. We've got to develop a draft declaration and consult with the people who've co-produced it to this point, and then we're looking for launching kind of sometime next year, and then looking to get adoption across all sorts of organisations. And we've said they're non-NHS things, housing associations, VCSE, all sorts of stuff. That would be really, really positive. So really optimistic about the impact this can have. And then next slide, please. I think this is my final slide. So what's worked well, the collaborative leadership approach in terms of, as I say, that consistent language and consistent vision has been really, really important. But the other thing has been really clear and visible senior leadership for it, both clinical and non-clinical, and from a range of different backgrounds and experiences. So it's been a real partnership. It's been a huge learning curve, I think, for all of us involved. And I think it's fair to say we still don't agree on everything, not by any stretch of the imagination, but we are very committed to working together. And I'd say this Healthy Weight declaration is one of the things that we are all absolutely signed up on and in complete agreement with. So it's been a fantastically positive experience so far. I've really enjoyed getting into a world that I was not previously involved in, but it's opened my eyes to all sorts of things. So I'm really positive about the next steps for us. So I will pause there, Matt, because I think I'm probably just about over time.
That was fabulous, Ewan. Thank you so much. A really good example of bringing the system together. We've got some time for questions, and we probably won't be able to cover everything, so we'll follow up on things afterwards. But I'm going to try and do this kind of rapidly, if that's okay. Debbie, I'm going to come to you first. So, clear that you've taken a whole systems approach there. It feels like it's a very broad program. How have you managed to continue to resource it? And is there have you got a specific advice or recommendation around other local authorities doing something similar?
Thanks, Matt. We've resourced it via our network of kind of health improvement leads across the system. So we already had good relationships with our partners, but it was really driven through a couple of key members of staff in our team who were absolutely passionate around making this work. Debs Alcock has left us. She's gone to you. She was really, a key person to drive this forward and showed great tenacity, I've got to say, around this particular area of work. So you do need to think about, I think, some dedicated resource to think about how you really drive this forward and how you implement it. In terms of thinking about how it's sustained, was that your second part of the question? Sorry, Matt.
If there's a specific recommendation or approach that you've needed to help other authorities take the same approach?
I would say to make sure that you don't reinvent the wheel and you link with, the work programs that you've already got. There's significant overlap here with the work that we'll be doing around tackling poverty, around engaging with communities. You've mentioned the neighbourhood health work. I think there is a real opportunity and need to bring those two areas together, using data to target areas of greatest need in terms of population health management, thinking about how we can integrate our teams to improve access and support for communities, training staff in those difficult conversations that Ewan has just mentioned, and absolutely being relentless, I think, around championing community and resident engagement. So not an easy question to answer, Matt, but I think, the key is, I think, to continue with the momentum if you can, and the more that you can embed this as a everyone's business approach, I think the more success you're going to have. Thanks.
Fab. Thank you, Debbie. That word momentum has come up a bit, hasn't it? Kerry-Ann, I'm going to come to you now. So obviously an incredibly important agenda, but schools are really busy, right? Schools are under the cosh. They've got so many things that they are also dealing with. So how do we help schools to prioritize this amongst all the other things that they are also doing? How do we make sure it's also kind of seen as a consistent approach to other issues or challenges that they've got? And are there any particular barriers that you've experienced so far?
I think when we're thinking about schools, I think it's the same as when you're working with any partners. It's thinking about what motivates them. So for us, it's thinking through actually food and movement is really important to educational attainment and outcomes. So actually, if those leadership teams in schools want decent outcomes for their children and young people, so they're really going to have to kind of engage and change the way that they work. But then also it's about making it easy. So actually a lot of this work really aligns with the curriculum. So it's about giving them the kind of the knowledge and the understanding about how they can easily deliver this as part of their day-to-day kind of delivery of education to children and young people. I think in terms of barriers, I think it will be interesting when we start to try and roll it out wider to schools. I think the thing that we're seeing at the moment is that we are seeing those early adopters that actually have really got, they're interested in innovation and they are committed leaders. So I think the key for us now is to really use those leaders to inspire the rest of the system and to kind of demonstrate the possibilities as well, that actually some of the barriers that partners put in place, actually we can work around them and it is possible to do things differently.
Yeah, thank you. My cousin, who was a teacher, told me about kids coming to school and having had 2 bottles of Lucozade for breakfast, and the fact that not only is that not good from a weight perspective, but also it completely throws all educational opportunities out the window. I'm wondering, Kerry-Ann, as a quick follow-up, where you think free school meals might play into this agenda. What opportunity might that present, or does that complicate things more?
Free school meals is an interesting one, because I think it is fantastic in terms of that it really doesn't single children and young people out. It makes everybody have equal access to food, but I think actually we have to think about other elements of it. So it is thinking about who our providers of school meals are, because actually we know that we have different contractors. We know we have different interpretation of nutritional standards. But also we know we have real challenges in giving children time and space to eat in school. So I know schools from where I've previously worked had actually shortened the lunchtime to 30 minutes. So children were really struggling to be able to sit down, and actually for eating to become a social situation. Actually, when we've got schools that are taking on additional pupils, building extensions, are they creating enough space for children and young people to actually sit and enjoy a meal together? So I think it's looking at more than just food being free, but actually, is it nutritional? Is it accessible? And is it enjoyable?
Yeah. Thank you, Kerry-Ann. Ewan, I'm going to come to you now. I love that phrase, by the way. Drugs are the mother of all disruptions. I was thinking of the drugs don't work, but sometimes they do, as you said, if they're used properly. But to quote Richard Ashcroft, this is whole system change you're setting up here. You're on a journey. This is whole system change. This is a range of partners. Just about anybody I imagine that you can talk to who wants to engage in this conversation. You want to have a chat with them. So firstly, how do you keep the energy in the system long term? This is not a quick fix. How any thoughts on how you keep the energy in the system long term? And secondly, what's your most unlikely or unexpected partnership or relationship that you've developed so far?
Oh, that's a good question. Okay, so I mean on the first one, how do you keep the energy up? It is really difficult because this is so hard. I think there's a benefit in as much as we've got a bit of a playbook from the work that's been done on alcohol and tobacco in the past, but obviously this agenda is a few years behind. So there is something about we know what works in terms of keeping up consistency of message, the fact that sometimes things take a very, very long time to happen. So we've got people who've been in and around the system who've known that kind of stuff for a long time. I think the other thing is the political political with a small p savvy to know that you never waste a crisis. And I think that's the thing is you have to keep changing the conversation to be based around what's happening at the moment. If you're still arguing the case from 12 months ago and everyone else has moved on, then you're missing the point. And I think that's where the drugs coming in as a disruptor is helpful because it has changed the game. It has changed the conversation and people are asking different things, but it still comes down to the same fundamental issue, which is we have far too many of our population living with overweight and obesity. So you've got to change the way you talk about it, but what you're trying to achieve is still the same thing. And I think that helps to keep it fresh. So I think keeping the message kind of versatile, I think, is really important in that as well. In terms of the most unlikely, I mean, probably given everything we've learned about commercial determinants of health across all of those other areas, there's a really kind of difficult thing about the pharmaceutical companies have phenomenal amounts of money, clearly are wanting to invest in a commercial solution to a commercially created problem, and that's problematic for all sorts of reasons. But on the other hand, they've got millions of pounds to invest in local systems. And so it's a really difficult balance of going, well, to what extent do we kind of take the money and say, yes, thank you, and we will put that to the best effect in terms of creating a healthier, better system for ourselves versus the probably slightly more principled, actually, you are part of the problem and we don't want to engage. It's really difficult. And that's quite a different conversation from, for example, a tobacco company or an alcohol company, because the drugs are a part of the solution. So I think that's and we don't have any formal relationship with any pharmaceutical company. but those things are starting to crop up as questions now, and I think that's one of the interesting kind of ethical and practical questions for us to wrestle with.
Yeah, definitely. And we're definitely seeing those conversations here as well. Can we just all show our appreciation to the case study panel? Thank you so much, everybody. And we are going to quickly move on to our final session of the conference with our keynote speaker, Professor Mark Pettigrew, Faculty of Public Health and Policy, London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, who's going to be talking about the commercial influences impacting on the ability for local authorities to create healthier places. So, Mark, over to you.
Okay, so I hope you can hear me.
Yeah, we've got you loud and clear.
Excellent. Let me just go to the start of my presentation. Okay, so I apologize for the hideous colors. I always make my first slide bright yellow so that I can find it on a Zoom desktop. So thanks very much for the invitation. And actually, that was an amazing set of presentations. And I sort of feel like the answer to this is already captured in the discussions that we've already had so far. And in fact, in Matt's summary at the start. And I suppose the short answer to the question on the screen is, it's to do with the control that industries and various harmful industries have over environments and places. And it's also to do with the inequalities that we've heard about, that, as you know, many of these harmful industries drive the inequalities that you have to deal with. So I'm a professor of public health at London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. And part of this thing, the logo down at the bottom right, the Commercial Determinants Research Group, and we do a lot of work on alcohol, gambling, some food industry, various other industries. So I'll skip through some slides which I think duplicate what stuff that's already been covered, but and this is sort of what you've been sort of talking about all morning anyway. That local authorities create healthier places through pulling different levels, different levers at different levels that affect the social determinants of health, planning and licensing, et cetera, et cetera. And as you know, we often think about this through the Dahlgren and Whitehead rainbow model and think about these issues through that particular lens. And I think one of the things that's quite interesting about the commercial determinants of health, as my colleague Nathan Manny has pointed out in a paper a couple of years ago, that the commercial factors which affect the social determinants often lie slightly out of view. So if you look at the Dahlgren and Whitehead rainbow, it has a number of different social determinants, as you can see on the right-hand side here. But the commercial factors and commercial forces are missing from the model. But just to skip ahead, if you look at any of the sectors in the model, they're clearly those social determinants, those upstream determinants, and some of the more midstream and downstream determinants are themselves strongly influenced by commercial factors. So actually, I'm not sure if my some of these might not be terribly visible, but I suppose it depends how your screen is set up. But if you think through any of the sectors in the model, it's fairly clear that they're susceptible to commercial influences. So if you think about the unemployment sector, well, exploitative employment practices might affect public health and health inequalities through that particular pathway. Clearly, the alcohol, food industry, other industries are a major drain on healthcare services. If you look at that inner yellow, whatever you would call it, core, some of these industries that we've heard about use the social and community networks that already exist to drive marketing and thereby drive health harms and inequalities. This inner core in the Dahlgren-Whitehead model, age, sex, and constitutional factors, I think what that refers to is genetic and physiological factors. which are often seen as not being susceptible to commercial influences, but in fact, the tobacco industry, alcohol industry, food industry, opioid industry, many of these industries have employed sort of genetic arguments and physiological arguments to argue that the harms that they cause are not due to their products, but they're due to genetic susceptibilities in people who are harmed. So the tobacco industry developed this model or this sort of set of explanations to argue that, well, yes, smoking might cause lung cancer, but that's just because people who get lung cancer from smoking already have a genetic predisposition, which makes them more likely to smoke. And similar arguments, the exact same arguments, have been developed by the alcohol industry, and so on. And we just heard in the last session and in other sessions about lifestyle choices, and clearly this orange sector of the model, individual lifestyle factors, which is itself is a somewhat contentious term. Now, I think we can see immediately that the industries, as we've heard, tobacco industry, alcohol industry, gambling industry, and so on, they normalize the harms that they create as simply a lifestyle choice, that this is just a lifestyle factor and it's something that individuals themselves have chosen to take on board. So it's part of an individual responsibility argument. Excuse me. So I won't go through the rest of these, but you can sort of see that in the rainbow model, the commercial forces, they lurk slightly out of view, but they're very strong drivers, as we know, of health and health inequalities, including at local level. So I'll sort of skip on. The other thing that I think is quite interesting to reflect on is that we know that creating harm is a key part of the business model for the tobacco industry. Tobacco kills up to half of its users who don't quit. But the same thing applies to the alcohol industry. The alcohol industry strongly depends on creating harm, because people drinking above guideline levels, i.e. above the CMO's guidelines, which by definition is drinking at a harmful level, account for about 68% of total alcohol sales revenue. So the alcohol industry is strongly dependent on harming its customers in the same way that the tobacco industry was. The same thing applies to the gambling industry, and we often hear the industry talking about people having a cheeky flutter, etc. This is a quote from my colleague Maeve Van Schalkwyk, who I think probably many of you know from one of her papers, and she makes the point that everyone is at risk of being harmed by the gambling industry, both online and on land-based venues. The business model is to exploit universal biases and normal cognitive functions in order to extract as much money as possible, using products and practices designed for this purpose. So this completely runs counter to the industry argument that there is a small group of people who are incapable of managing their gambling or managing their drinking or whatever. Gambling is no different from any other harmful product. And indeed, I mean, you often hear this argument, everybody needs to eat, but the same thing applies to ultra-processed foods. A substantial proportion of income from the corporate food system is generated by the manufacturing of ultra-processed foods, which are harmful to human and planetary health. This is from a paper by Ben Wood and colleagues. So harm reduction is not just a sort of an unfortunate thing which happens as part of the production of some of these products. It's actually built in. It's a design feature. It's not just it's not a bug. I've put up a shameless plug for the film that about the commercial determinants of health that May and I produced recently at the right, which teases out some of these issues. I'll put up details of it at the end. And so we've heard you talk quite a bit about inequalities and the sort of obligation to reduce inequalities. And at a local level, that's clearly a public health priority, and at a national level. But the industries that we've been talking about pull in the opposite direction. Just as they make their profits from creating harm, commercial actors profit from creating inequality. They do this in several ways. They actively create inequalities by targeting marketing at vulnerable and excluded communities, as we've heard. They create physical, social, digital environments that drive poor health and drive inequality. The other interesting thing that's not recognized widely, I think, is that these harmful industries also weaponize inequality. They use inequality as a smokescreen. So they will say, for example, that, well, yes, say alcohol might cause harm, but actually it's not us that's the problem. It's not our industry. It's the social determinants of health. Look at all these public health textbooks about the social determinants of health. That's where the problem lies. So let me just give you an example. So inequalities are often used as a sort of camouflage. And I use an example from the alcohol industry, but we've looked at this across a wide range of different industries, and they hide behind inequality. The tobacco industry did this, but this is something that's common to all of these harmful industries. The alcohol industry one is quite a good example. So as you probably know, the alcohol harm paradox, whereby alcohol harms are not evenly distributed within the community or within the population, rather. Disadvantaged groups suffer from higher rates of alcohol-related hospital admissions and deaths compared with advantaged groups despite drinking less. So that's the alcohol harm paradox. Disadvantaged groups drink less but are harmed more. And the alcohol industry exploits the alcohol harm paradox to obfuscate and obscure the causal relationship between alcohol consumption and harm. And I've lots of examples of this, but here's one from the Portman Group from 2016. And I think at the time, there was a study published showing rising levels of alcohol harm. And the head of the Portman Group, the alcohol industry corporate social responsibility body, said, neither the authors of the study nor the media highlight the alcohol harm paradox. The poorest communities in the UK drink the least, yet suffer disproportionately from alcohol-related harms. This surprising relationship reflects the complex interactions between alcohol and other vulnerabilities to which those from lower socioeconomic communities are more exposed. There are complexities here that have not been fully considered. So you see this very, very often. I would consider this, completely cynical. It's sort of like inequalities washing. It's using inequalities as a distraction and a red herring to encourage you or one to take your eye away from the products and the industry that's creating the harms. So this is actually a strategy, a sort of narrative strategy or a framing that's been used repeatedly. The tobacco industry developed this decades ago, this particular set of arguments. The gambling industry uses it, the food industry, the opioid industry, baby milk industry. They all exploit poverty and inequalities using this same sort of narrative framing and have done for decades. It's called an alternate causation argument, in which you point to an alternative cause of the problem. Just another example from the advertising industry, which we've heard a bit about this morning. I've always loved this quote from George Orwell, that advertising is the rattling of a stick inside a swill bucket. But the advertising industry itself is a commercial determinant, excuse me, that's funded by harmful industries, and it profits from the harms of those industries in exactly the same way. And it's also resorted to this sort of inequality washing as a strategy to defend its own markets and to defend its corporate customers. So in this particular example, inequalities are again used as a sort of red herring to deflect responsibility for obesity, to deflect the responsibility from the industry to structural inequality. So this was a statement that was put out by the Advertising Association in 2020 when the then government was proposing restrictions on HFSS advertising. And the Advertising Association said, these proposed bans on HFSS advertising will not solve the structural inequalities linked to deprivation that cause higher rates of obesity among people. Attention-grabbing new regulations will not undo decades of underinvestment in targeted and community-based health initiatives, blah, blah, blah. So again, this is another sort of strategic and cynical use of inequalities to distract from the industry. And there are examples, as I say, across many different industries. Just very briefly, when we think about place-based approaches, probably one of the most famous examples is John Snow. I suppose it's a historical epidemiological example, taking the handle of the Broad Street pump in 1854, when there was this epidemic of cholera in Soho in London. And he suspected that there might be an agent in the water supply and took the handle of the pump, as you know. And this was all before the discovery of germs, which I think is an interesting story in itself, because it signifies that you don't need perfect evidence to act. But anyway, so this is part of public health history, which you'll know about. But it's always struck me that the commercial factor has sort of disappeared into the background here as well. And we don't often think about the role of the water companies. And in fact, the water company that was responsible for producing the contaminated water, the Southwark and Vauxhall Waterworks Company, which is where Battersea Power Station now is. Excuse me. It was notorious at the time for drawing their water from the Thames and Battersea downstream of where London sewage was discharged. And in fact, 3 years before Snow took the handle of the pump, the company's water was described by the microbiologist Arthur Hassel as the most disgusting which I've ever examined. But the really interesting thing is that the water company at the time resisted Snow's conclusions. It blamed the other water companies, and it also shifted the blame to miasma, which was the other theory of how cholera was caused at the time, to bad air, general dirt, and household habits. So in other words, it shifted the blame to the individuals. The directors of the company defended the purity of the water in parliamentary inquiries. They commissioned their own analyses and expert opinions to prove that the water was safe. Again, this is the scientific strategy that the tobacco industry and other industries have used. So for other purposes, I was looking at this recently, and it just sort of struck me that in 1850, the same strategies which harmful industries use today were being employed to the very letter back in the 1850s. So just to wind up, just to acknowledge that the other places which should concern us are the digital places, the digital world, one of the most powerful commercial environments ever created. And the social media industry knows the harms that it causes. We often think, or it often seems, that the commercial interests outvote or overwhelm the interests of public health and local authorities and communities. And we ask ourselves, why can't we all just pull in the same direction? The obvious answer to that is because the goals of these industries and the goals of public health are often fundamentally opposed. And to wind up, I'll just skip past this. I just wanted to finish by pointing to, as one sort of part of the solution, to think through the conflicts of interest, which we've heard about earlier, and the good governance toolkit to help in making judgments about partnerships and potentially problematic partnerships, as Matt was talking about just earlier, and Ewan. So the toolkit was developed by Anna Brooke and Catherine Corner, and it is a framework and a set of tools to help think through some of these difficult judgments and decisions which have to be made. So I thought that was it's a useful practical starting point and a good point to end on. And I'll finish there. And that's our film. It's freely available online. And it was released on the 3rd of November at that link. And it covers some of the issues that we've talked about today and also in this talk. So thank you very much. I'll stop there.
Mark, thank you. That was Absolutely superb. We're now going to introduce our panelists for discussion. So as well as Mark, we've got Fran Bernhardt, who's from Sustain, Maria Castellina, who's from Frameworks UK, and Dr. Oliver Mitten, Public Health Consultant for Milton Keynes. And Robin, I'm going to hand over to you to chair this panel discussion. Colleagues, this will run for half an hour, so we'll come back at 12:50, and then today's meeting will finish at 1 o'clock. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much, Matt. My computer crashed a few minutes ago, so hopefully it won't happen again. But if it does, come back in and take over. That was just inspirational presentation, actually, Mark. And I frankly had never heard of inequalities washing. And if I don't remember anything else from that, that's something I'm very aware of. Each of the panelists that Matt just introduced have been asked to give a 5-minute presentation on particular aspects of local commercial determinants of health. And I would say the focus, of course, has been very much on national, but we've started to think and talk about local commercial determinants of health, came in particularly in Aris' presentation earlier. And if I forget to say it later, as well as the tool that Mark just mentioned, we will be launching today as Food Active a briefing guide around commercial determinants of health at local level, and the toolkit that Mark just mentioned is referenced in that, I'm pleased to say. I think Mark's already done his pitch, as it were, so I think that the first person to speak should be Fran. So Fran, can I give you 5 minutes? I'm going to do my best to time you, and sort of will jump up and down if you're going over, but over to you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Robin. And wasn't that a brilliant presentation? I feel like I have so much to respond to that with, but right, on with my 5 minutes. So the work that I do to support local governments to pass healthier food advertising policies gives me a front row seat to the emerging patterns across the country, especially when it comes to the challenges that local governments face when trying to pass strong restrictions on harmful commodity industries. So I could have talked about many different issues that local governments come up against, because there are numerous, but I'm going to cover 3 major issues which have in some way affected most of the local governments I've worked with. Firstly, there is no accountability for the status quo. So we have the evidence to prove the path we're continuing down is harmful to health, equality, and our planet. But when it comes to the policy that I work on, we even have a well-evidenced intervention that contributes to addressing a problem. We have almost 7 years of precedent. We have peer-reviewed studies that evidence the improvements to health. There's no evidence of financial losses. And yet, what we're seeing is that when we present these policies to decision makers, the onus is on us to make the case for the change, but the case is never made for the status quo. There is never a sense that this needs justification beyond critiquing the proposed changes, despite there being so much evidence against the status quo. For anyone who's familiar with the Nuffield ladder of intervention, it's important to remember that that first rung of the ladder is do nothing, and therefore that too needs justification. So despite the prioritisation of health and climate and equality in so many governments, doing nothing or significantly delaying doing something that's likely to be better than the status quo seem to be considered the safe option. So it's all too easy to critique incoming proposals, and I've seen up close how in many cases this lack of accountability for the status quo has led to local governments delaying interventions that are likely to have improved health. They delay them by 2 years or 5 years, and others that are now still without a policy despite us doing so much work to get it over the line. And of course, in the intervening years, the numbers of local people living with diabetes and heart disease and obesity are not decreasing. So, secondly, there is increasing industry intervention to undermine progress, and there are negligible protections for these vulnerable but well-evidenced policies, which industry makes full use of by spreading misinformation about, in this case, losses in advertising revenues. And as the BMJ investigation exposed earlier this year, and unfortunately, I am witnessing industry aggressively double down on since. They're stoking fears around local and national governments, many of whom are rightly concerned about their financial futures, despite the fact, and I'll say it again, that there is no evidence of losses of advertising revenues. In fact, revenues have been maintained in all areas that have brought in a policy. So we need to broaden our understanding of how vested interests work. When it comes to restricting unhealthy food advertising, it's not just the food industry. In fact, most of the aggressive pushback and outright lobbying has been from the advertising industry. So we need to think about those allied industries actually that Mark spoke to that would need to change business practices as a result of the interventions we're calling for. And it's not even just industry, it's also the people within local governments that are holding the advertising contracts, because of course their roles are focused on making local governments money from these contracts. And then there are other commercial teams that may want to partner with industry in future and will and have argued against these policies on this premise at decision-making boards. So we must more proactively recognise that while the individuals in these roles may be sensitive to our cause, their roles are fundamentally putting them at odds with our aims to prioritise health by bringing in robust restrictions on these industries. So, thirdly, we need iterative policymaking. Often local and national governments invest a lot of time and resource in passing the policy, but little after that. But when we're working to change industry practices, it's bound to be a game of cat and mouse. I would love to think we would get the policy right first time, that everything would be watertight, there would be no loopholes, but that's just not the case because, of course, industry has a vested interest in figuring out a way to work around our policies. So we must be wise to this practice. So if we're serious about prioritising health in policies that curb harmful industries' practices, we must have a robust implementation process and a continued review process so that we build in a route to address loopholes, to address new issues, and can make the policy more ambitious, so that rather than depreciating in value, the work we put in to get it over the line magnifies over the years. So finally, in order to pass these important policies, we need to review the processes that commercial determinants of health policies are put through. We must establish a system which provides better protections for these policies, as well as accountability measures for the status quo. And in order to make sure they are and continue to be robustly implemented, local governments must consider them to be iterative and must regularly review them and take action to strengthen them. And of course, we've published guidelines which set out how this should be done. That's it from me.
Well done, Fran. Sorry, it's a tall order in 5 minutes, isn't it? And I like where you started, where do nothing should never be an option, should it? So I'm going to ask Mira Castellina from Frameworks to perhaps start talking about the kind of language we should be using, which has come up earlier as well.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Fran and Mark, for those presentations. They were absolutely excellent. So for those who may not be familiar with Frameworks UK, which is the organisation I work for, we're a not-for-profit communications research organisation, and we specialise in getting to the heart of how people think about issues, and then how can we communicate them in different ways to really build understanding and shift hearts and minds to create change. So I'm coming at this from perhaps a slightly different perspective than lots of the people on the panel and wider today, but one of the challenges we have to creating change in this area is the way that we all think about health. And what I'm talking about is the kind of deep level subconscious assumptions that we hold about health and use to kind of reason about health issues. And one of the biggest challenges we see in our research, and we see it come out in work that we do around health, is this sense of individualism. I am healthy or not solely as a result of my own choices around what I eat, whether I exercise, whether I smoke or drink. And that way of thinking obscures the role of all of the wider factors that shape our health, including the role of commercial players. That way of thinking is more likely to make us feel defensive when we try and engage people with these issues, because we've all internalized a lot of shame and stigma. If I can't lose weight, it's because it's my own fault. I'm not disciplined enough. The role of those commercial players missing from view. And one of the other ways that this manifests, because I have complete agency, there is nothing else shaping me, is that advertising doesn't have an effect on me. Most of us as adults like to believe we are not influenced by adverts. Children might be, but I'm not, right? I'm immune. Now, we know that the food giants are spending hundreds of millions of pounds on advertising, and we know their adverts work. So how can we help people see that? And what we also know is that this kind of tendency, this individual way of thinking about health, is manipulated and used by commercial players. So we are told to drink responsibly, be gamble aware. The onus from the industry is placed back onto the individual. But the good thing is there are things we can do about this in how we talk about these issues to kind of break through these barriers, break through those unhelpful assumptions, and build a kind of movement for change. The first of these is, particularly when we're in the space about food, is to really lead our conversations with health first. So we found in our research that when we're talking about issues like obesity, if we start there, if we start by talking about obesity and what that means, actually people go straight into that kind of individual mindset of shame and stigma, and it doesn't help move the conversation forward. When we start by talking about the need to improve health and what we can do to improve health, things shift and we suddenly see support for the kinds of policy changes we might be seeking. So that's a much better way to start the conversation, start in that broader place that doesn't immediately invoke that kind of feelings of personal shame, stigma, blame of others. The other thing we have to do is really explain how our surroundings shape our health and make the conversations about place and not people. So we need to explain how so much of the food on our supermarket shelves is simply bad for human health, from healthy looking pasta sauces full of sugar and salt to bread with ingredients I can't pronounce. We need to explain that. We need to explain how so many of our neighbourhoods are flooded with junk food and that over 1 million people in the UK live in food deserts, meaning there aren't places to buy affordable, healthy food. And we really need to explain how healthy eating now costs considerable money or time, and too many of us don't have enough of those things. We need to explain that constantly and often to help build that understanding of the world around us and how it shapes our health. And in particular, we need to build and explain, not just state that advertising shapes health, but really explain how it does so, to get people to understand that they are not immune. So we need to talk about how the commercial players are relentlessly pushing unhealthy products, especially to our children, and the variety of different ways in which we're advertised to, from sponsorship on our favourite sports team shirts, to on our bus ticket, to bombarded with digital pop-up ads, to emails direct to our inbox. Junk food advertising in particular is constantly in the spotlight, which means we cannot turn away. And I think really interestingly, in Mark's presentation, he talked about the new film Unmasking Influence. And one of the other things that we've seen in commercial, to try and build understanding of the commercial players that is useful, is to kind of build an understanding that right now we're not being told the whole truth. And Unmasking Influence really speaks to that. This sense, there is another more helpful, can be helpful way of thinking that people have, is that people kind of know some of the systems are rigged against them, that there are big players that are making money at their expense. People have an understanding of that. And actually, if we tap into that by talking about how they're not being told the whole truth, how they're being misled, and actually what we could do about it to change that, that can be a helpful way of explaining the role of commercial players too. So my big, I guess, call to action on this is that we all have a role to play in shifting the conversation and actually shifting the way we talk about these issues. Because when we have one conversation differently, we might start to think, we might convince someone to think differently. But when we all do it over and over again in all of our conversations, in all of our external communications, then we start to shift the way this issue is talked about at a national scale. And when the conversation is finally firmly where it should be on the terrifying role that the food giants are playing in harming our health and those other commercial players, that's when we can build the space for change, because that's when we have public support to make the changes we actually need. Thanks very much, Robin.
Thanks so much, Maria. These are just fascinating presentations. I think we're all going to be reflecting an awful lot later about all sorts of things. I'm very struck by how you focused on individualism to begin with, actually. But yeah, really interesting. Thanks for that. We're hoping to have time for questions later on for everybody. Let's see how it all goes. Ollie, Milton Keynes came up earlier, so good to hear from you and a discussion about engaging local system leaders. Over to you.
Thank you, Robin. So yeah, I'm going to talk about engaging local system leaders, both in local authorities and the NHS. And I want to emphasise I'm very much speaking in a personal capacity and reflecting my wider experiences on these challenges across a number of roles. So I'm going to offer 5 reflections on how we do this. And in some ways, I think building on the previous presentations and conversations we've had, they're all going to be very different. I think we're all striving towards similar ends, but reflecting our different roles in the system, approaching this in slightly different ways. So my first reflection is be clear on your role. And there's maybe a few roles you can play when engaging systems leaders, but there's clearly a key one, which is around advocating for a particular policy or perspective. And then there's a second one, which for me, I might describe as being a policy analyst or an honest broker, where you're trying to set out a range of different options and help decision makers understand the full suite of options, the benefits and risks, and come to a reasoned conclusion. And the choice here is partly about what your formal role is. You know, if you're a decision maker on a board, you can advocate for something. If you're being pulled in as an advisor, well, your role is different. But it's also about how your system operates and what your system likes to see. And that's the local context that you have to digest and understand. But I think it also depends on what your skill set is and where you're most comfortable. My second reflection is seeing engagement as a process and not an event. I hate being asked to go into a meeting cold, and I remember some very bad experiences of doing that at an early stage in my training in public health. So I will try to elongate that meeting or the single event into a process, meet people beforehand, give a written briefing before, and set out my thinking more as an options appraisal perhaps, and a set of factors to consider rather than just do this particular approach. And within the meeting, try and pull people back from forcing a decision as such, but engaging in this process of thinking this through, in turn allow the conversation to continue after the meeting. I find it very hard to get people to change their mind in a single meeting. People tend to approach those situations with relatively fixed mindsets. Part of this is around relationships. I think we all know how much those matter to making things happen at a local and national level. The approach of I've helped you with X, can you now help me with Y, is often a very good strategy. Thirdly, maybe this should have come earlier in my list, is seek first to understand before being understood. So people approach these issues through many different perspectives. Most people in health and certainly local authorities won't have had training in public health that many of us will have done. Different life experiences, different educational backgrounds, different professional pressures and expectations in terms of what they're trying to maximize or get from a particular decision. So it's important to understand those, and I think reflect those back in your analysis of what the options are and the pros and cons of a particular decision. In many ways, I try not to assume where people will approach these issues from. I find, somewhat surprisingly, you might say, a lot of the decisions around regulation, fiscal decisions, we tend to see those as political, but actually someone's political party, I often find, is a poor guide to where and how they will approach a particular issue. So try not to assume where people will start from, but listen to what they're saying. So part of that is around education for me, and it's about educating people around that public health perspective. Fourth, facts and data. I am a research scientist as well as a public health consultant, and I like to start from that perspective of being able to substantiate anything I can say. I have many colleagues who will like to claim multinational company X is bad, to which my response is great, but why are you saying that? Where's your evidence? How can you substantiate that? What proportion of the food it sells is ultra processed, and how does that compare to other companies? Is there an independent analysis of how this company is performing compared to comparable companies? So put those facts in front of people and then let people draw their own conclusions. That's often much more powerful than leading with a simple statement. For food and physical activity, we often need to go beyond. It's for us, these are about, but for everyone else, these are part of a wider set of life choices. And it's important to recognize that in the decision-making process. I'm a big fan of some of the work that Rich Smith, a public health economist, Exeter, has done. He talks about offensive public health economics, by which he means that public health needs to get on the front foot with some of these economic arguments preempt some of these industry arguments and put their own data or unbiased data in the public domain about some of these economic trade-offs that companies will put forward as counter arguments to some of these policies. And this is something that Rich and I have done in some of our work we've done, evaluating policies like the soft drinks industry levy and planning restrictions on new takeaway outlets. Within those facts, think broadly. Think about precedents, think about behaviour of other local authorities and NHS trusts, think about reputation and political risk. Those can cut both ways as pros and cons for acting in a public health way. And also try and thread in these issues around inequalities and vulnerable groups and how the decisions will play out for those particular groups. Finally, be positive and don't give up hope. Look and often wait for the windows and opportunities to influence. We talk about policy windows, they're not always open, but in my experience, we're always surprised at how frequently or how readily they may open up. And then finally, the world can change, but it takes time. I remember, this is going back 10 years ago, I went on a holiday/academic trip to New Zealand, and I met some relatives who lived in the South Island of New Zealand. They started pulling out pictures from the old newspapers, photo archives, showing me what my relatives used to do. And my relatives out there were deeply embedded in the tobacco industry, farming, agriculture, tobacco out there. They had a whole academic industry supporting the tobacco industry. Fast forward 50 years, New Zealand has one of the lowest rates of tobacco smoking in the country, or has at times been one of the most proactive countries in terms of tackling tobacco. Those fields that now used to grow tobacco now grow fruit and vegetables. So things can change, but it does take time. Thank you, Robin.
What a nice positive example to end on. Just to reinforce something else as well, you made the point about political parties and assumptions. I fully agree with you. I can give you quite a few examples when I think I probably did make assumptions, and actually engaging with them as an individual, understanding how they saw things and framed things was critical. I really do have a thankless job. We've just had some amazing presentations, and look, we're not going to be able to do justice for them. I've got 10 minutes for questions, which is ridiculous really, but it's been such a fascinating morning with lots of themes recurring. I'm going to at least make sure everybody has one question, which I've got down, and we'll make sure we have. Colleagues are looking at things coming through on Q&A, so please do pose them. If we get the chance to add in one or two, I've got one I really do want to make time for, but we're just going to have to see how things go. So if all of you can be as succinct as you can, obviously, and can I just say to all the people listening, obviously we'll try and pose some of the questions afterwards if we can't do it all, and thank you for your interest in this. Mark, I'm going to start with you. That really was a great presentation. A lot of the stuff we're talking about is on a national level. I'm just going to try and put you onto a more local position here, because one thing I find quite interesting is I could talk to you about one or two districts I've worked with who don't actually understand how commercial influence are happening locally as well. What are one or two practical steps local authorities might take to reduce the influence of commercial interest, particularly from less healthy food and drink marketing? Mark, that's for you.
I mean, I think the answer to that goes back to the having some prior position or guidance on how to deal with partnerships and conflicts of interest. And I mean, I think that is where the good governance toolkit comes in, because I think a lot of these, although a lot of this is about at the national level, but at the local level, you do have issues around partnerships or potential problems with some of these partnerships. And I think having a priori some guidance in place or some prior thought given to how to deal with these partnerships and about the risks and benefits is probably an important first step, as opposed to going in sort of cold and assuming that more is always better or any partnership is always good. So I think some of the answer to that is about having done the prior work to think about what a local say conflict of interest statement or set of guidance would actually look like. And there's enough sort of I mean, included in the good governance toolkit. There are enough tools and frameworks out there to help with having that in place in advance to avoid being wrong-footed, I think.
Yeah, that's really helpful. It gives me a chance as well to plug our own briefing that will go out today, but also going back to, we're talking about the healthy weight declaration. I've heard colleagues say having a healthy weight declaration in place has helped them support planning colleagues, for instance, being confronted with planning applications from fast food outlets. So getting a policy in place, I'm going to ask Maria, we talked about language, we talked about wording and framing. How can local authorities involve residents, especially those most affected, in holding commercial actors accountable for their impact on health? That's interesting phrasing.
So, I mean, I think there's lots you could say on this, but the one thing I kind of want to speak about is how we have those conversations with local people to get them to engage and kind of get them bought into what it is that we're trying to do. And those conversations are so important. And I just want to give one example. So we've been working, we've done a lot of work with Nottinghamshire County Council around how do we talk about all of the wider determinants of health, so broader than the commercial determinants, but how do we build understanding of all of those wider factors that shape our health? And the way we talk about it is to talk about the building blocks we all need for good health. So that's our homes, a job that pays enough to pay the bills, access to education, transport. All of those are building blocks that we need for good health. And this was an approach that we worked with Nottinghamshire to put in place. There's other recommendations too, but that's one element of it. And they, Active Knots, who were part of the broader group we were working with in Nottinghamshire, used this approach to have very different conversations about physical activity. So related issue area, but they used this approach so that when they were having community conversations, instead of starting with the individual, what they did was start with the place. And so they were like, these are the building blocks we all need for good health. We need a warm home. We need access to enough healthy food. And then they said to people, which of these are wobbly where you live? Which of these are crumbling where you live? Which are missing? And that opened up such more productive conversations because people hadn't internalized that individual, this is about me, this is about something I've done wrong, this is about where I live, and I can point out the things that aren't working. And it meant that, one, people were more engaged, but also it actually revealed some of the different solutions that needed fixing that local people were aware of, but perhaps the people in the council weren't quite. So it led to better solutions and better conversations. And I think if we can do that, change the conversation to be about place and what's needed in a place when we're talking about local authority areas rather than people, then that can have such a difference in terms of the outcomes we can do and how we can build that local support.
Thanks, Maria. I mean, I think that came through particularly with the discussion where Debbie was talking about Warrington and engagement. I think that place-based approach is really important. I think we're starting to get that more. Thank you. Fran, I've got one for you. What can we do at a local level to support more progressive controls on marketing of HFSS food and drink through national policy? What can we do locally to control marketing?
Thanks, Robin. So when it comes to healthier food advertising policies, local governments are really leading the way, bringing in very strong, standard, robust policies that are vastly different from the policies that we're seeing at the national government level, which are a much poorer standard. So really, we've seen local governments setting the standard for a long time on this. And essentially what we need to see is for that to continue. So we need to see them to continue bringing in robust policies, because it indicates this issue is a priority and that national government's policies are not currently sufficient to address the problem. It obviously produces evidence to support government doing more. And as someone who has closely followed and led on responding to national government consultations on healthier food advertising for several years, it would be hard to overstate the extent to which we rely on that evidence and precedents from local government policies in national government policy. And it also shows change is possible, that you can bring in these robust measures and that you can incentivize these industries towards better, healthier actions. And I suppose, secondly, as part of this, we need to hold these industries to account so that we can take action to make it less possible for them to use their tactics on local and national governments to undermine these policies. So we must call out industry intervention better. And obviously, as I said earlier, we have been seeing a lot of that. And so in order for that to happen, we need to recognise vested interests and industry intervention, and we need to take action to expose it.
Thanks very much. So policies are important. That's coming through hard and clear. And it was interesting to hear Councillor Denson speak earlier about the complexities in local authorities and the processes needed. And I think also in Warrington, how long it takes sometimes, and we sometimes have to be patient to get them in place. Ollie, I've got perhaps a tricky one for you, and I don't mind how
Thanks,
you.
Robin.
I know that's all right. It's just it's come through on Q&A. It's not mine, so I'm just going to read it out. And if other people want to comment, we won't have long, but I'm going to let you lead. And if anybody else wants to come in on it, I'm absolutely fine. So I'm reading it straight out off my phone. Really good to hear Maria from Frameworks talk about how we've internalized individual responsibility. It feels to me that this links with what people say about having difficult conversations with people about weight. Are they really difficult? Why is that? What do people think about the approaches that, for example, Doncaster, they're probably not here, but if they are, sorry, but are taking with their compassionate approach to healthy weight? That's a complicated question. So it's about how we're having conversations. Is it? I'll
I think it's a really good question, Robin.
Yeah, it is a good question. Go on then. I'll shut up.
I think we do have this societal narrative, and our perspective on this is very individualistic approach. That is a Western construct to some extent. If you go to Asia, I understand that approach is different. They're much more focused on contextual factors, and I think that is difficult for having the conversations about policy and regulation. But I think it also plays out in those individual level conversations, because they come across as being much more about attacking the person as an individual. I remember when Cancer Research UK started to get interested in obesity, and they put a whole series of adverts out. I thought they were great adverts. I thought I'd make a really strong point about the rise in obesity and how it's needed to be taken as a serious issue, think about regulation. But so many people took that as a very personal assault on themselves. And I think that speaks to this this narrative. And I think it's a shame we haven't connected these issues up in a more coherent framework, because the two communities, like my community, public health community, and the community that's more focused on working with individuals, don't tend to interact much. But I think there's some really important parallels and opportunities for connecting those observations and kind of how the conversation needs to change.
Thanks, Ollie. I mean, I just made the comment, and sometimes the kind of conversation you have, and I think that came through from Maria as well, it depends who you're having the conversation with sometimes. I'm conscious that I should be handing over. Does anybody else want to comment briefly on that? Because it was a really interesting question before I hand over to Matt. Okay, no, that's fine. We are on time. I need to hand over to Matt. So from my perspective, that was just a really fascinating. Thank you for a really good introduction, Mark, but also you didn't have long. Fran, Maria and Ollie, some really interesting points. We need to think much more about commercial determinants of health, as we know. So thank you for that session. Matt, I'm going to hand over to you.
Oh, thank you, Robin. Thank you, everybody. That was just incredible. And I do feel like we've just started to scratch the surface of this. So thank you all so much for your input. I've been furiously scribbling notes. I just hope I can read them back afterwards. So, colleagues, we are rapidly approaching the end of what I think has been an amazing morning. And I'm going to introduce now Claire from Nifty Fox, who's going to give us a summary of some of the things that she's captured from the conference so far. So, Claire, over to you.
Thanks, Matt. I'm sort of half hoping that by speaking at my screen I'll sort of show it bigger for everyone. But if that's not the case, I will try and share.
I think we can see it, Claire. That's great.
Can you see it? Is it big for everyone? That's good. Yes, so really interesting. And again, thank you so much for having me. I'm just going to recap the speakers at the start. So Blackpool Blackpool Council's leadership sort of mentioned that we need to stop stigmatising individuals, which has certainly been a repeating factor throughout the conference today. And sort of saying that it's important for everyone in the council to be on the same page to achieve the shared goals. They pointed out that systems leadership is something that a lot of people get wrong, and again that's something that we've touched on quite a lot. So it's clearly a really important thing. We also touched on poverty equaling breeding bad diets, and part of their strategies was to get free breakfast in schools, and also sort of try not to do double breakfasts, introducing a Healthier Choices Award for restaurants and other food outlets, and ensuring people have access to the right information, and also reviewing their advertising policy so as not to encourage unhealthy eating. We talked about whole system approaches, and it is possible to turn the tide because on the BCA, because we did it with smoking. We learned that successful whole systems approaches have a sociological approach and involve communities. One of the challenges can be to keep momentum going once you get started, and we also need public support and government backing to make it work. Moving on to influence to impact, we learned about how it's important to enable partner organisations, building capacity and sharing knowledge between different partners, and again trying to reduce the influence of advertisers, and also making sort of like movement sort of more joyful. We learned about the importance of working across agendas from different partners to achieve the same goals, and listening to local voices, and to stick to your guns even if it can be tempting to give in to advertisers for commercial reasons. I will then move on to case studies. So we'll learn from Warrington with a focus on partnering for change and cross-sector collaboration. Big focus on co-production from the very start. So 6 partners pledged, and some of the outcomes were to have on-site catering and focus on workplace well-being, and also inclusive language, and really focusing on it being a systemic issue and not individual shaming. We learned about system support from Cheshire and Merseyside. So they took a whole school approach, making sure that pupils and teachers and families and the communities were all involved, and reframing the issue from not just not focusing on weight, but also about feeling good. There's again a focus on strong foundations of collaboration and also tailored support. And again, the importance of making it fun and also celebrating success. Then we heard from North East and North Cumbria about supporting the work that's already in place, but also adding value. One of the challenges was that discussing weight feels personal, as opposed to talking about sort of drugs and alcohol issues, and also the challenges of weight loss drugs. So we focused on strong leadership, strong partnerships, involving stakeholders, and also focusing on prevention over treatment. It was raised that we should really be using the conversation on what's topical at the moment, such as weight loss drugs, to sort of push the agenda. There was then a discussion about commercial influences. Talking about really how insidious alcohol and tobacco and the gambling industries can be. So they blame genetics without taking responsibility for the harm that their own products cause. And actually its harm is good for business. They hide behind inequality. There was a George Orwell quote, which was really good. And that's that advertising is the rattling of a stick in a swill bucket. We also discussed the water companies playing a role, and also the challenges of digital advertising. And I'll just recap the discussion there. Some really good points. I tried to get some down, but not everything. Everyone was speaking really fast. But again, like really good stuff there. The challenges of no accountability for the status quo, and the first rung on the ladder is to do nothing. So you really have to sort of push to make change. and harmful industries will work around policies. It's like a game of cat and mouse. We also talked about putting the focus on commerce and advertising over individual and over the individuals and not shaming them. And also making sure that people realise that healthy diets do need time and money, and it's not possible for a lot of people, and people don't have access to these things. So it really is about taking the blame away and putting it more so on advertisers. We talked about making sure that you understand before being understood, and also helping build relationships. So, you know, you could say, I help with X, can you please help with Y? And also, we should be changing the conversation again away from individuals and more onto place. And a really good example, which I highlighted there, was that it is possible and it does, but it takes time. Tobacco was a huge industry in New Zealand, but you know, it's not anymore, and New Zealand did say no to tobacco. So that's everything I got down. And yeah, thanks for having me today.
Claire, that was brilliant. Thank you so much. You're very talented. Well done. And that loads of information captured there. Almost an impossible job. We'll be sharing those summaries produced by Claire on the Food Active website shortly. So, colleagues, rapidly moving towards the close of today's conference, just want to highlight a couple of resources that are being launched. And a reminder of the support available by Food Active. So launching today, we've got our commercial determinants of health briefing for elected members and local authority officers. Well worth having a look at that and trying to use that locally to influence policy and strategy. We've got our Healthy Weight Declaration e-learning tool produced in collaboration with Middlesbrough Council to raise awareness and to support communications. We've got our case studies, which we'll be sharing, and we've got the findings from the stakeholder survey as well. And in addition to that, as I think you all know, we've got an extensive range of existing resources to support local authorities, NHS organisations, schools, and wider partners to implement the declaration. And if you want further information, please don't hesitate to contact the superb Food Active team. I'd just like to close by thanking all of our speakers for their contribution today and for their time preparing and delivering the presentations. Thank you all for joining us. We hope you found it useful and appreciate you taking the time out of your really busy schedules. A bit of a challenge. I think we do brilliant work in this area, but we don't all do the same stuff. And I think it's really good to challenge ourselves, learn from each other, take good practice, best practice, right practice from across the Northwest, across the country, and see how that fits locally. So I'm always interested in learning from other areas, and we're happy to share what we do as well. So please do keep on talking and sharing with us. The recording and speaker presentations will be uploaded to the Food Active website and circulated with delegates very soon. Inevitably, we will be sending you a short survey. Please do complete it because that really helps us shape how we do events like this in the future and informs those topics and those themes. And if you're interested in working with us, please do get in touch. Very much hope you've enjoyed today. Very much hope to see you at next year's conference. I was asked to summarize 2 or 3 things. I've got literally pages of notes here that I can't go through. So I'm going to just pick on a few things from Mark's presentation that have really stuck with me. Creating harm is a key part of the business model, and those themes of harm production and inequalities washing really kind of resonate. But that doesn't mean that we can't do things here. We do need bolder action, bolder policies from governments, as Catherine said, but there's still loads we can do locally. We can support our communities to be outraged. We can work together through a whole systems leadership approach to improve the health of our population. We should be hopeful. We should use the evidence and the data that we've got to impact, and we should also celebrate success. So with that as a call to action, thank you very much for joining us, and that's the end of today's conference.
Thank you, Matt.